Frairen's feet were killing her. Her back hurt, her muscles hurt, hell, even her ears hurt at this point. Her planetary military command had assured her that human basic training would be a cakewalk, and all she had to do was bring back their training secrets to strengthen their own military. At this point, she was sure she had been set up. Frairen sighed out painfully as she came down onto the ground, not even bothering to swish her tail out of the way as she sat. Beside her, Frairen and Himmel were also crashing to the ground, though Himmel came face down into the grass, his human rucksack wobbling on his soaking wet back and rifle clattering on the ground. Frairen was one of the Yorpal, a semi-bestial race of aliens that hailed from the Dagmar Prime. Her people were one of snout and paws, and the humans kept calling her a furry, no matter how much she tried to get them not to. While her fur was a dull yellow, it was not uncommon on her planet, and she didn't understand why the humans kept snickering. Frairen was a Carlake, a lizard-like peoples that the humans kept comparing to cobras. The little snakes in the Carlakian peoples shared the broad hoods around their heads and the forked tongues, despite the fact that they had legs and feet much like the humans themselves. Himmel was a Poit, a shorter, multicolored race of peoples from the Pillen Four. Despite being a slender, athletic race that held deeply colored, pupilless eyes, they had pointed ears and shared many features of the humans as well. This led to much teasing of Himmel from the other human recruits. Depending on the day, he was either referred to as Private Frodo, Honeythorn, Hermie, Drizzt, or Private on the Shelf, whatever that meant. There had been more names, but it appeared the other humans felt a need to narrow them down. This kind of thing appeared common around humans, and they made fun of themselves to a far sharper degree, as if they were taking it easy on these otherworldly races, but still making sure they were included in this odd ritual. Frairen looked around at all the other members of her people and the races from other planets, and frowned at how hard they were all flagging. They had all been sent down here to this forsaken wretch of a planet to try and pass human boot camp, a trial that all new human soldiers went through to weed out the weak from the strong. It would be their job to, after the end of the training, assimilate said training into the already anemic regimes of their own worlds, as Earth was outputting some of the toughest and deadliest fighters amongst the stars. Their training even made the Daramir pale in comparison, and they were an insectoid people who had scythes on their second pair of arms. Were being the keyword. The humans wiped out every hive they could find, and many were steadfast in the belief that the Daramir were extinct. "All right, my little star blossoms," their human trainer called out, his brown campaign hat not even sweaty. "I'll give you 10 minutes, then we get back on our ruck. You have to be in tip-top shape in order to pass muster, you know." Frairen bared her teeth at the human in a quiet, pained snarl, as did many of her fellow Yorpal. These were called drill sergeants, a particularly psychotic and sadistic flavor of human that always made Himmel shudder with fear. They wore plain olive drab uniforms and a brown hat called the campaign hat, and it sported a bright brass emblem on it to mark their status. They seemed to never break, never tire, and were some of the meanest bastards she had ever met in her life. Even the Carlake balked and shrank away from their visage. One Carlake had flared his hood at a drill sergeant, even baring his fangs, and the human had beat the Carlake within an inch of their life. It wouldn't have been so bad if the Carlake hadn't tried to start the fight in the first place, trying to slash at the human. But the statement was received loud and clear. Human drill sergeants were not to be trifled with. Humans in general were an extremely tough and rugged people, being called Iron Children by some of the other planets, while others had far more dire names for them. The Daramir were recorded to call the humans Irakimmel Matkanir, or red-blooded wraiths in their own tongue, remarking on the humans' tendency to engage in melee willingly and rip the limbs from Daramir fighters. That was why Frairen, despite the fact she wanted to howl and latch onto the human's throat with her teeth, looked away from the human as she stalked down the road, looking over the human recruits who stood by patiently, letting their off-world fellows rest in the grass. "Let me see your feet, recruit," came a voice over Frairen's shoulder, and her ears pinned back with fear. It was Drill Sergeant Marshall, a female human that was far more vicious than her male counterparts. A male human recruit had catcalled her one morning after PT, and she had simpered at him, even making a flirty motion towards the man as she got close to him. Frairen had thought it was some kind of odd mating ritual, watching as she was chugging water. And what she did to that human? Well, the medics say they could grow them back, and they had been put on ice rather quickly. It was the screams that still haunted her more than the sight of those two bloody, ragged chunks of I said, show me your feet, recruit, Drill Sergeant Marshall said again, and Frairen obeyed, taking off her modified boots and pulling the cushioned sock off her pawed feet. Drill Sergeant Marshall came around, tutting her tongue at Frairen as she knelt down and took the foot in her hand. Your feet are too damn soft. Same with the other Yorpal. I'm sure they'll toughen up after a few more weeks of rucking. Recruit? Drill Sergeant Marshall looked into Frairen's pink eyes with those icy blue ones, her short-cut blonde hair framing her face like the cheeks of a helmet. She seemed so small and pretty, despite what Frairen had seen her do. Most human females were pretty, but there was a barely restrained savagery in those eyes, and it scared her. Frairen wondered if she would tear off her foot if she was rude, so she instead dipped her head, keeping her voice low and turning her head to expose her neck. Yes, Drill Sergeant. When the human was safely away, Frairen bent her leg to get a good look at her foot. It was raw and blistered, and she could see a few spots that were bleeding into her sock. She had always been proud of how tough her feet were, but it appeared the highly advanced footwear back on her planet were a crutch compared to a modified combat boot. Were they designed to cause pain? I don't want to be here anymore, Himmel muttered into the grass, still laying face down on the ground, and his legs splayed out behind him. My feet hurt. My body hurts. Everything hurts. Zeterin hissed out in agreement, chugging water as fast as his mouth would allow before coughing a little, wiping at his chin with his sleeve. It's amazing they can keep up this pace. They don't even look tired. We ran 3 miles this morning for PT, Frairen sighed out, putting her sock back on as she watched Drill Sergeant Marshall trudge off to harass the other off-world recruits. Then we had chow, and now we're out here rucking like cavemen. Himmel thumped his head against the grass a few times, his rucksack wobbling on his back. I don't want to eat out here. They would make us eat those nasty rations out here again, Zeterin said with a frown. He enjoyed the chow hall and the food the humans made, but their combat rations left a lot to be desired. Frairen hung her head backwards, her long furry ears splaying out along her rucksack. Oh, mother, the combat rations. Did you know the one I had yesterday was made in 2071? 2071! That's nearly a relic at this point. It belongs in a museum. Frairen, Zeterin, and Himmel continued to bemoan their situation until they were all called back up onto their feet. Only 6 more miles to go, my little alien minions. Come on, now up and at 'em. My humans are getting cold, Drill Sergeant Killjoy called out, spitting out a stream of chew juice into the grass. Frairen groaned as she stood, as did Zeterin, and they both hauled Himmel back onto his feet. The 5'3" poet looking like he could die standing. As they continued to trudge down the gravel road, Frairen looked over towards the humans. They were walking along easily, even after all the miles they had already marched, and she noticed their rucksacks were larger than her own. She grimaced, bearing one of her long canines, then looked back towards the long string of struggling off-worlders ahead of them. If the other humans had been veterans, or well within season, she would have been less frustrated with the experience. However, the humans next to her were pure civilian, fresh recruits that had simply been following the mandated workout regimes of the human governments. She breathed in deep, smelling them all. She was surrounded by bakers, mechanics, teachers, artists, farmers, hunters, professional drivers that smelled of cleaner, leather workers, coffee baristas, and even pizza boys. She could still smell the cheese and tomato sauce on them, even this far into training, and it made her stomach growl. There had been more off-worlders than what currently remained, Hell, the group still left behind was only 200 strong, a fair jump from the 2,000 that had started this training cycle. They were supposed to only fall out in onesies and twosies. Instead, her fellow citizens of the stars had fallen out in groups of hundreds, some not even lasting the first few weeks of mostly hazing and getting yelled at. Frairen was shaken out of her memories by the humans starting to sing, and she rolled her eyes, her ears going back in annoyance. The humans always liked to sing when things were miserable. Even now, it was nearly 90 Earth degrees outside, and the blazing soulless star beaming down at them from on high. How could they find the mind to sing under such conditions was beyond her. And from the narrowed eyes of her fellow citizens of the stars, she had to imagine they were just as annoyed as she was. The next 6 miles felt like they went on forever, and when the concrete earthworks of a training site loomed out from a bend in the road, Frairen felt her heart drop. They made us. We walked to our training site? Himmel cried out, his face trailing sweat as his bright orange, pupilless eyes dulled down in color. We're supposed to train after all this damn walking? Drill Sergeant Killjoy chuckled from behind Himmel, clapping him on the shoulder. Of course we are. How are we supposed to toughen up a fresh recruit if we drove everywhere? You have armored personnel carriers, rotor wing transport aircraft. I've even seen you humans fall from the sky with great blankets and nylon, yet we walked all the way here? Why? Himmel cried out, bending over to rest his hands on his knees and sucking in breath. Drill Sergeant Marshall strode up beside Frairen, and she saw the human was walking backwards while addressing both the humans, the citizens of the stars. It's range day, recruits. This will be your first rifle and pistol qual. And we're starting out with rifles. Frairen cut her eyes to the weapon that hung on her shoulder. It was an odd little mishmash of plastic, metal, carbon fiber, and electronics. On her own world, they used pulse rifles that fired hot shots of plasma powered by a microreactor, though the range was limited. The point propelled darts of metal via mag rail, again powered by their own flavor of microreactor, but they were slow to fire, having to reload, charge, and fire from a canted magazine. The Carlake didn't even bother with guns, instead focusing on their armor and shield projectors that kept them safe from flying metal darts, balls of plasma, and anything else anyone could throw at them. This allowed them to get in close, using their radiating plasma blades and jag axes to cut their enemy apart. Despite that, we failed under the assault of the Daramir, all but the humans. Humans who still use a propellant and cone of metal to destroy their enemies. Their weapons fired faster, went further, and split through armor and shields like butter. Even as Frairen looked at the rifle, an XC-1 Lancer, she couldn't help but frown at it. Integrally suppressed, semi-caseless ammunition, digital ranging computer, single burst, and automatic firing selector, and a 30-round magazine. It was practically Neolithic. They still had a lug for a bayonet on it, and they expected their troops to fix the long blades onto the end and then use the rifle like a spear. How in the stars did humans kill off the Daramir? Frairen muttered to herself, but limped forward with the line of recruits towards the gun range. With rucksacks doffed and hab units set up, they were all brought around to the range itself. It was as low-tech could be. Just sandbagged dugouts and electronic targeting systems that told a small data slate where the round had landed. Frairen stared out to the targets, some as far as 600 meters, and turned to Himmel. They can't be serious. As the grave, Himmel sighed out, his rifle nearly as tall as he was. Humans can put one of these caseless rounds into the forehead of a target at 600 meters using their targeting computers. They can punch holes in a target at 300 meters using their iron sights. Their what? Zeterin hissed, looking down at his rifle in confusion. Himmel flipped the Carlake's rifle around, pointing to a small steel stud at the rear of the weapon, and a similarly shaped Y stud at the end of the barrel. These! We have to qualify with the computer and these today. They can't be serious, Frairen cried out, looking down at the 2 iron sights with a face of horror. They expect us to use just these 2 little pieces of steel to hit a target? It's bad enough we can't use the helmet reticles yet, and have to look through this stupid little box. Frairen gestured at the targeting computer optical sight on top of the rifle, but Himmel just shrugged his shoulders. First squad, you're up first, Drill Sergeant Killjoy called out, and a line of humans mounted the firing positions, falling into line cleanly and neatly. They are trained in their schools, you know, Himmel said absent-mindedly, resting the buttocks of the rifle on the ground and wiggling a pinky finger in his tall ear. From the age of 10 to the age of 18, they train with even older rifles in their schools. It's a requirement to graduate. Frairen clicked her tongue. Barbaric. What business do children have with training for a war? According to the humans, it's they won't be children forever mentality, Himmel replied, flicking the gunk off his pinky off into the grass. Frairen saw this and raised her bushy eyebrows. When you first got here, you used to only do that in the comfort of the showers with your ear picks. We used to have time for it, Himmel grumbled, though Frairen was pretty sure the humans were rubbing off on the point. As the humans took up positions and waited for the go-ahead, other troopers who staffed the range walked out from the concrete bunkers and viewing rooms, many of them holding their own rifles. Frairen saw that they were mostly NCOs, sergeants and the like, and they all took up a position between two shooters. What are they doing? Zeterin asked with a tilt of his hooded head. 10 rounds at 600. Pause and wait for further instructions when fire order is complete. Range is hot. A voice rang out from over the intercom, and the first human fired a shot down range, the tracer floating through the air. It hit smack dab at the chest of a target at 600 meters, and nearly every Star citizen watching felt a desire to shrink backwards. She just did it in one go, Frairen asked aloud, her ears perking and falling down out of a shared expression of fear and curiosity. All of them took a few steps back in a staggered recoil when the NCO standing between the shooters began to fire down around the prone recruits, spattering their faces with mud, foliage, and dirt. Move, and you will die, Drill Sergeant Killjoy called out, pressing the mic against his throat, and his voice booming around them all. Do not flinch. Do not jerk your head. Stay on target. Himmel stumbled backwards a few more steps when Drill Sergeant Marshall let a burst of automatic fire trace around a human's head, even as he fired and barely missed the fourth shot on his target. They're fucking mad! The humans were not done, as barrels of crew served mortar weapons swung out of the bunker. With concussive booms, they launched mortar rounds high up into the air, and they came down only 50 meters away from the recruits. All the Star citizens flew to the ground as the rounds came down out of their shadow arcs, exploding with plumes of dirt and soil. What are they doing? Zeterin shrieked, trying to hug the ground as tightly as he could. Why are they using explosives? A human staff member who had remained standing the entire time looked down at Zeterin, giving him a playful kick with his boot. Oh, quit hiding down there. Those are just training rounds. There isn't even shrapnel. As the human range staff fired around the humans and the training rounds, apparently made of a soft plastic, exploded in the distance. The recruits fired on, going to a different target when the range staff called out for them to do so. All of the human recruits went through with their first go, most of them qualifying the first time around, and it came down to the non-humans to have their go. Frairen watched the range staff pour bags of sand around the firing positions, steeling herself for the noise, when she heard a whimper behind her. She turned, seeing one of her fellow Torpil throw down her weapon and shrink down towards the ground. The two males beside her kept their ears back and didn't look at her, looking elsewhere. What are you doing? Frairen hissed at her, stomping over to the blue-furred Yorpal and giving her a swift kick to the thigh. Stand up! You can't embarrass us like this! They're going to shoot at us! The Yorpal wailed, cowering and shaking with unbridled fear. They're going to shoot at us and explode the ground around us! It was just supposed to be easy! Get up, you Kerwit! Frairen snarled, giving her another 2 hard kicks before snatching her by the back of her uniform and hauling her off the ground. Get up! You will not embarrass us here and now! You will not! No, 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 no! The Yorpal howled, even as Frairen continued to slap and hit her. The other males looked away. It was her duty to discipline the female, not theirs. It was the Yorpal way. Frairen picked up the XC-1 Lancer from the ground and shoved it into the blue Yorpal's arms, snatching her up by the ears. Hold that fucking rifle and do the training. We've come this far, and we will not falter when it is time to make this moment ours. Stand up and quit whimpering. Frairen released her ears and turned around as the other Yorpal shakily straightened up, sniffing and reshouldering the weapon. When she fully turned around, Frairen found herself staring into the eyes of the drill sergeant marshal. The human was so close that Frairen could feel the woman's breath rustling the fur on her snout, and she swallowed. Drill Sergeant Marshall grinned fangedly, her eyes so predatory that Frairen thought she was in trouble. Her voice was low, just low enough to where only she and Frairen could hear the words. That is what I'm talking about, furry. Keep your people in line and show no fear. There is leader material in you, and by God, I will rip it out of you and make you wear it. Frairen swallowed, suddenly quite hot under that uniform, but nodded. Yes, Drill Sergeant. Frairen's iron resolve had steeled the rest of the Yorpal, causing both the Karlik and the Poit to steel themselves as well, even though nearly 40 of them were about to quit right then and there. Frairen was shoved forward by Drill Sergeant Marshall. You first, furry. You and you. You too. Don't stand behind that damn Karlik. I can see your ears. The human began shoving off-worlders forward towards the range until the bays were full, and again the staff took their positions, standing above the Yorpal, Karlik, and the Poit shooters with magazines fully loaded. Those are just blanks, right? Frairen heard Himmel ask from a few spots down. The human range NCO took out his magazine and showed the Poit what was inside, and Frairen heard Himmel's sharp intake of breath. Don't jerk, don't move, and you'll be fine, the NCO said, then slapped the magazine back into place. 10 rounds at 200. Pause and wait for further instructions when fire order is complete. Range is hot. Don't take too long out there, aliens, the voice called out, and Frairen narrowed her eyes at that one word. She didn't like being called an alien. Always sounded super rude and generalizing. She barked out in surprise when the NCO next to her fired a round right in front of her hands, spattering her fur and eyes with sand. Frairen sputtered, blinking the sand from her eyes. There was a terse word above her, and the NCO moved away, replaced by the boots she knew to be Drill Sergeant Marshall's. Fire your weapon, Yorpal! The human woman roared, firing a burst of rifle rounds into the sand just near Frairen's head. Fire your weapon! The enemy is coming to fuck your corpse! Shoot! Shoot and kill! Frairen shook her head, ears perked, and trying to keep down tears of panic as she looked through the optic on the rifle. The computer was triangulating her shot when a boot crashed against her rifle. Drill Sergeant Marshall kicking the optic right off the top rail. Frairen watched the little tan box cartwheel off down the range, and she whipped her head around to stare up at the human in shock. Fragmentation has destroyed your targeting optic. Use your iron sights and destroy the enemy, Drill Sergeant Marshall screamed, her broad smile threatening as she fired 2 more shots into the ground near Frairen. Shoot! Shoot, goddammit! Frairen got back down behind the rifle in a panic, her eyes and fur covered in sand from the human shooting close to her, and tried to align the iron sights. Her own people's weapons fired themselves, locking onto a target via the AI within the rifle itself knowing friend from foe, and telling the shooter when it was safe to pull the trigger. Here it was just her own finger, her eyes, a rear circle sight, and a post she had to somehow align. Frairen squinted her eye with the other one closed, then squeezed the trigger. The rifle punched her in the shoulder like a hammer, and she winced, the rifle ejecting the half casing into the air with a ring of steel as it cycled and placed another into the breech. Drill Sergeant Marshall, holding her rifle in one arm and looking at her data slate in the other, fired 2 rounds into the ground near Frairen without looking, scaring the Yorpal half to death when she saw the human not even paying attention. Dead center of target, Drill Sergeant Marshall called out, kicking Frairen in the shoulder. Again, Private Frairen! Frairen shook her head, clearing some of the sand from her face, and got back down behind the iron sights, the sights wavering due to her shaking hands as she fired again. She then fired 2 more times, hoping to get past this step. The ground shook as the mortars came down, filling the target field with smoke and plumes of dirt. 1 on target, 2 off. Poor showing, Private Frairen. Drill Sergeant Marshall called out with a laugh, and she turned, firing 2 shots into the ground near the point beside her before turning back. Keep shooting! By the time Frairen had completed all the fire commands shouted from the speakers and was rotated off the range, she was covered in sand, dirt, and shaking from head to tail tip. She felt exhausted, even though it only lasted a few minutes, and found Zeterin and Himmel in the same state, the 3 of them standing near each other and breathing heavily. That was intense, Zeterin hissed out shakily, cradling his rifle to his chest. But I did get all hits. Himmel wiped at his forehead with his palm, his hand coming away slick with sweat. I was doing well until the sadistic sergeant started kicking my legs. He kept saying I had it too easy and was too accurate. How did you fare, Frairen? She kicked my optic off, Frairen said listlessly, brushing at her fur with halting movements as she stared wide-eyed towards the ground. And I had to use the irons. Frairen turned her head and saw the female Yorpal from before was vomiting into the grass, her face covered in just as much sand and dirt, and her pants were wet in a place that Frairen really wished they wouldn't have been. At this point, however, she could not blame the other Yorpal. If anyone twitched their head at the wrong time, they would have been dead. All right, my little stargazers, Drill Sergeant Killjoy called out, scrolling down the data slate as he pulled off his uniform belt. Looks like most of you passed this phase, but don't worry. There are more to come for you to prove yourselves. More? The other Yorpal cried out, giving a soft burp as she tried to wipe bile away from her chin. Overhead fire range conditions are in effect. All range staff avoid standing on the range, and keep all crew-served weapons barrels facing at the 12 o'clock, the booming voice said over the speakers, and the barrels of the large crew-served machine guns prodded themselves out of the concrete bunker, their barrels pointing skyward. While the human recruits fished their hearing protection out of their rucksacks, the citizens of the stars all looked on in horror. We have to do it again? Frairen asked quietly, watching the most forward human recruits start walking as they were routed onto the range. Again? Drill Sergeant Killjoy said with a chuff of a laugh. Private, we have 7 passes on this range under different conditions. Why else do you think we store ammunition out here? Don't worry, though. We have chow trucks coming out to make sure you guys get some nice hot food. Zeterin brightened up at this news. Chow trucks? What kind of chow are we getting? Chili, Drill Sergeant Killjoy said absent-mindedly, but looked up with a grin as the blue-furred Yorpal gave an audible gurgle. Another splash of vomit hit the grass, and Frairen closed her eyes, a single angry tear flowing down her furred cheek. Humans were definitely made from tougher stuff than the rest of them, and this was going to be a very long night. Himmel was exhausted and was struggling to keep his eyes open the entire time he was in formation. Frairen and Zeterin weren't doing any better beside him, and he turned his head just enough to look at the 2. Frairen's soft yellow fur was as dull as ever, since they wouldn't let her take the time to groom it, and she looked as bad as the other Yorpal. They were a semi-bestial race, one of snout and paws, and they were lagging behind their human counterparts. Not that Zeterin was faring any better. The cobra-like lizard body Karlaken looked like he needed a good soak in a tank of scale conditioner, and was a little flaky. If anything, Himmel, one of the Poit, was doing rather okay as far as things went. Sure, they were a little shorter than the humans they were training with, and the humans themselves kept calling them Star Elves, while putting them on high-up places as a prank, but at least a lot of human soaps and hair cleaners were a nice one-to-one translation in terms of physiology. Himmel's head snapped back to facing the front when the company's senior drill sergeant spoke up, waving a clipboard in a hand. Looks like everyone left here in my little menagerie has passed their rifle qual, he boomed, waggling the clipboard. Even our little alien friends passed with somewhat flying colors. Himmel saw Frairen bristle at the word alien. She didn't like the word, but Himmel didn't really care as much. It was just a word. After all, he had been called a lot weirder and odder things than alien. As a reward for all of our Mars Attacks friends, as well as you human beasts, I have issued a 10-hour pass starting now, zonk!" The senior drill sergeant bellowed, spiking the clipboard to the ground. Every single human bolted. "What is going on?" Himmel shouted, whipping his head back and forth as the human recruits had shrugged down and started sprinting as soon as the odd word had left the senior drill sergeant's mouth. What does zonk mean? A more kind human recruit gave Frairen and Zetterin a push, her face alight with mischief and giggling. "Run! Run! Before they catch you!" Himmel snapped his head back around to see both Drill Sergeant Marshall and Killjoy coming for them all, hands outstretched, and he needed no further prodding. "Make stardust, people!" Himmel shouted, running as fast as he could with his short arms pumping. Frairen, far faster than any of them, caught up to Himmel with the human and Zetterin close on her heels. "Is this some other kind of training? This is so stupid." "No, no, no!" A cry went out from behind them, and Himmel turned his face just enough to see Drill Sergeant Marshall snatch up a panicking Yorpal. The human cackled evilly, hoisting the blue Yorpal above her head with her massive arm muscles. "Guess we got one for the toilet scrubbing duty, Killjoy." Himmel panted and started running so fast that even Frairen had to fully stretch out her legs to keep up. At the bottom of the small hill their barracks was set upon, the rest of the recruits were laughing and wiping sweat from their foreheads, while others were calling transportation to the more proper side of the base. "Hey, my dad sent me enough money for the entire company to get a drink," one of the humans cried out with a laugh, slapping his hand to his forehead. 6,000 EGC! Let's all get drunk, boys! A massive cry went up from the crowd of humans, while their Star Citizen compatriots all stared around in confusion. When the cattle cars arrived, these operated by civilian contractors, everyone piled on where they could. Unlike the usual training ones, these had seats and air conditioning, something that the other space races were not used to having in any shape or form. According to the humans, suffering in the heat made you stronger, and atmospheric bubbles were for pansies. The cattle cars dropped them all off at the largest bar on the base, large enough to facilitate not one, but 4 companies at once. Himmel had heard that humans were thirsty people and liked to drink together in a social setting, not much unlike his own people. Unlike the Poits, this bar was a raucous, loud, and bright place blasting music while humans played their odd martial games like darts, pool, cornhole, and some odd one called beer pong to test their durability. "This is a drinking establishment?" Frairen asked with perked ears as they stepped inside with the other recruits, her canine face looking around in surprise. "Why is it so loud? Where are the dancers?" "Dancers?" Zetterin asked with a quirked eyebrow scale. "You have dancers? Why would there be dancers in a drinking establishment?" Frairen shrugged. "Well, the males of my people don't drink alcohol, so we make them dance for us while we do." A lot of human recruits also turned to stare at Frairen with their own looks of surprise or raised eyebrows, and she held out her clawed hands. "What?" One of the female human recruits muttered, looking to her friend. "Just a bar of dancing furry boys." "What's wrong with that?" Frairen asked aloud, setting her hands on her hips as everyone laughed. Then she wondered if the male Yorpal in the training company would even be able to drink whatever the humans were going to throw at them. Zetterin wiped a tear away from his eye slit, having been hissing in laughter so hard that he nearly deployed his hood. "My goodness, and here I thought we were a little strange, not using cups." "You don't use cups?" Himmel asked, seeing an empty table and quickly pushing both Zetterin and Frairen towards it. Zetterin shook his head. "We either pour it in our hands or use the bottom flesh of our hoods to hold the drink as we slurp. Water is precious, and we do not waste it for washing." "Seems quite economical, really," Private Alex said, the female recruit sitting down with the rest of them as Private Timothy sat down as well. "Hope you 3 don't mind us joining you. The other tables are full of assholes." Himmel looked at Private Alex. "Assholes? Is that another peoples we don't know about? Did they enter the training cycle late?" Frairen burst out into laughter with Alex, Timothy, and Zetterin following right after. and it took a short minute to explain to Himmel what the two humans meant. Thanks to the generosity of the one recruit and his very kind father, the bar was quickly whipped up into shape and flights of alcohol were soon making their way to every table, allowing the beings from the stars beyond to sample and try the drinks of Earth. Himmel recognized the large mug of cider one of the kind barmaids set down and happily bounced in a seat. "I know this one. This is apple ale. I saw a commercial for this while I was waiting in the atmosphere terminal, and I've always wanted to try one." "What's this?" Frairen asked, holding up a dark bottle of amber liquid. Alex grinned wolfishly, a nice comparison between the human and Yorpal. "That is something we put on ice and drink later. For now, let's get these beers down while they're cold." Frairen cast her eyes at the bottle, but followed the pattern the rest of the table was doing. Himmel wasted no time, the mug massive compared to his smaller hands, but it did not slow him down from drinking deeply and loudly. Himmel cried out with a happy exhale, the cider phone giving him a rather thick mustache. "It's just like I thought it would be. It's so sweet and nice. Nothing like the tangy stuff we have back home." "I believe it's the apples," Zeterin murmured, smacking his lips happily as he took quick little slurps. "Apples are catching on quickly in the outer ring markets. Only Earth has them." Frairen, seeing no other option, took a few laps at the liquid, but her eyes closed shut in pain as her cheeks puckered. "Too sweet! Way too sweet!" "Here, try one of these," Timothy chuckled, switching out her mug of cider for a mug of red ale. Himmel quickly took the other cider mug, chugging his other one quickly so he could enjoy the one Frairen didn't want. "Attaboy, Poit!" another table called out, making Himmel chuckle. "Ah, this is much better," Frairen said with a contented sigh, lapping at the red ale with closed eyes. She licked her lips clean, then admired the mug of ale. "The color is lovely, but it does taste stronger than ours. What is in it?" "Green, mostly. I don't like the fruit stuff either," Timothy said, clinking his mug against Frairen's with a polite tink. "Too sweet." Frairen looked down at her mug with raised ears, lifted it, and then clinked it against Timothy's mug. "Ooh," Frairen said with a smile, then twisted in her seat to clink hers against Zeterin's. "Oh, I like that. Our glasses are all made from crystal that is quite fragile." Once everyone had downed their first ale, or second in the case of Himmel, Alex popped the cap off of another very dark bottle, giving it a swish while giving flirtatious eyebrow raises to Timothy. "Oh, come on, Alex. They just got here," Timothy said with a laugh. But even still, he pulled out 5 glasses, setting them in a row. Alex began pouring a measure of the thick black alcohol into the short glasses, her smile devious as golden shimmers warbled in the dark liquid. "Hey, they bought it for the table. It's time we showed these space invaders how to party." "That smells," Frairen started, then slowly leaned backwards as Alex cracked open a can of energy swill. "Like poison." Zeterin inhaled through his nose slits. "Smells delicious to me." "I love you guys," Himmel said with a hiccup, then laughed as he set down his now empty second ale glass after making sure he got every last drop. "Oh, this is gonna be fun," Alex said with a maniacal chuckle, as neither she nor Timothy were even buzzed. Himmel at this point was quickly entering drunk territory, while Zeterin was stone-cold sober, and Frairen was starting to feel the tips of her fingers buzz. Alex poured the sparkling green energy drink into the black shimmering liquid, and it began to audibly hiss and bubble like a witch's cauldron. "What in the suns is that?" Frairen said, now leaning backwards away from the table and covering her nose. Alex held up one of the glasses, admiring it with a cunning eye. "This is my love, is the IED. IED! The other tables called out, and suddenly every table was now making the drink to join in with Himmel's table. Himmel, giving a small hiccup, snatched up a glass and stood up on his seat, striking a Morgan pose as he set his boot on the edge of the table. "Hi-E-D!" Himmel called out drunkenly, and the other glasses were raised into the air. "I-E-D!" every voice screamed out, and Alex jumped to her feet. "Scouse!" Alex screamed, and tipped the drink back into her mouth, quaffing it in one go. Everyone else followed suit, but the Yorpal was struggling to get through their own drink. Frairen was struggling so much that she nearly heaved, and instead resorted to opening her mouth and pouring the foul concoction straight down her throat so it wouldn't hit her tongue. Himmel downed his much in the same way as Alex, and he let out a loud burping laugh as he fell backwards. Zeterin, having already drank his, quickly reached out with an arm and caught the giggling Himmel, the Poit lolling back and forth in his arms, while the Karlaken smacked his lips again. "This tastes very herbal, it's very nice," Zeterin murmured, then offered his glass to Alex. "Might I have another?" Alex took the cap back off and then held up the bottle. "Karlaken's found another IED, boys!" The room erupted with hoots and cheers as everyone prepared another round of drinks, much to the horror of the Yorpal and delight of the Karlaken. "Another one?" Frairen cried out. Then she held her stomach as she let out a guttural, herbal burp. "I can't drink another one of these disgusting things." Alex cracked open another can of energy drink. "Sorry, kitten, them's the rules." Frairen let out a small whine as Alex poured the energy drink into the alcohol. She had been told to follow all human customs, and she was starting to find it to be far more painful and disgusting than she had imagined. "Woo!" Himmel howled, rolling around backwards in Zeterin's arms and reaching out for the glass upside down. "Hit me again, trooper!" Zeterin let out another hiss of laughter, having to muscle the Poit to keep him upright. "I think we found the Poit's weakness." Much like Himmel, the other Poit were having a very good time with their fellow recruits, and were having to be wrangled by either the humans or Zeterin around them. 4 Poit had even come out of their shells enough to ask how cornhole was played, and were now doing their best to slam sandbags into the hold boards. As the cry went up again, Frairen groaned out as she lifted the drink, opening her mouth and letting the horrid slurry once again flow down her throat. Her stomach tried to revolt instantly, but she muscled herself into control, letting out another rumbling burp and covering her nose with her pawed hand. After their second IED, the generous human with his father's money started ordering cocktails for the tables, the bar all too happy to oblige as he kept swiping his bank card. After a couple of minutes, multiple glasses were before the table, with Himmel wasting no time in drinking something called a Negroni. These smelled delicious to the virgin nose of the off-worlders, and soon they were all poking and picking at the drinks to see what was their fancy. The humans, of course, took to these with ease, but the off-worlders took far more caution. "Mars, say it again," Zeterin asked Timothy, lightly licking at the salted rim with his bifurcated tongue before taking another sip. Timothy picked the cherry from his Tom Collins and popped it into his mouth. "Margarita." "Margarita," Zeterin murmured, his face flushing with the flavor. "Oh, it is nice, very tangy and floral." Himmel leaned so far backwards to finish his drink that Zeterin had to catch him again, and the Poit gave out a happy sigh. "Human drinks are the best," Himmel said loudly, giving a burp and a hiccup before reaching blindly for the next drink. Zeterin handed him a spare Tom Collins, and the Poit didn't even bother smelling it before plugging the straw between his lips. Zeterin was only just becoming buzzed with the humans. Himmel, more or less, orbiting around the moon at this point, while Frairen was starting to feel warm vibrations all up and down her body. "You know what this bar needs?" Frairen slurred out in question, sucking down her second whiskey sour and enjoying how the straw made drinking easier. "What's that?" Alex asked, unwrapping the cap to the dark bottle now that it was chilled on the ice. Frairen drunkenly held up a padded finger as her mouth struggled to form the words. "Cute little Yorpal men dancing and twirling through the air, with glitter all in their fur. I think it would deeply heighten the experience." Timothy, Alex, and Zeterin snorted with laughter, while Himmel laughed just because the others were laughing. They had been drinking for nearly an hour now, savoring the many cocktails and delicacies of the human bar. But it had come to the crescendo as they neared their second hour. Himmel was still holding on to consciousness, now laying across Timothy's shoulders due to the Poit's legs failing to function properly, and the male human was now good and fully buzzed. Alex was in the same way as Zeterin, both of them seasoned drinkers, but Frairen was struggling to hold on to reality, constantly wavering back and forth in her seat. Though her tail was wagging so hard, it was starting to annoy Zeterin, who kept smacking it out of the way from both him and his drink. "What do you think, Alex? Do the final shot and go for a za run?" Timothy asked her, snorted and laughing as Himmel gave the human a wet raspberry in the side of his face. Alex chuckled as Timothy pushed Himmel's face away, then set down 5 fresh shot glasses. Yeah, why not? We'll be back in a while anyway, plus the rest of the guys need time to wrangle the Poit and drag the Yorpal outside. The Poit had been hit hard by the alcohol, but instead of knocking them out cold, it seemed to fill them with a relentless amount of drunk energy. Drinking enough human alcohol had unlocked a trait unknown to the Poit, as their own beverages on their planet were truly lacking the power present in human alcohol. As such, they never had the stomach capacity to ever get drunk on their own brand, and they would have had to be constantly drinking it through the day like water to even get halfway to where they were now. Human alcohol hit so hard and so quickly that they had entered a stage of hilarity and humor they had never felt before, and were becoming a menace around the bar by sneaking into places they should not have been, trying to throw darts stupidly long distances, or demanding the humans create a game of foosball where they themselves were the little players, all of them holding onto ropes. The Yorpal were, well, their legs weren't working. The humans could tell they were happy due to the wagging tails and cheering, but their bodies were having a lot of trouble functioning, with the male Yorpal struggling the hardest. One male Yorpal with purple fur had to be hauled off to the latrine by 2 of his human platoon mates, lest he made a mess right there on the carpet. Frairen was one of the few Yorpal managing to stay upright, though it was a challenge worthy of a medal in her eyes. Zeterin and the rest of the Karlaken were happily chatting amongst themselves, and with the humans who weren't having to spend their buzz taking care of the Poit and Yorpal. They had had their eyes opened to the bright and colorful world of cocktails and the deep, intricate liquors made by the humans. On their world, there were only a few alcohols made since water was a precious resource, and while still tasty and potent, they had no idea that liquor could be made from so many things. To the Karlaken, the humans were the liquor MacGyvers of the galaxy, and were quite intrigued when they learned that humans could even make alcohol from cow's urine, mare's milk, and even ants. Alex filled 5 of the shot glasses, then reached over and poked Frairen, who was looking at a brightly lit neon jukebox. Hey, last one, and then we can go get pizza. Pizza? Frairen asked quickly, her head snapping around to look at Alex with raised ears. We get pizza after this? Pizza is fairly normal post-drinking food, Timothy said, rearranging Himmel so the Poit was rotting his shoulders. Frairen looked at the glass being offered to her, her mouth salivating at the thought of the Italian-American delicacy, then snatched it up and slammed the glass back. The burning liquid hit the back of her throat like a forest fire, and she choked, coughing out harshly and pounding her hand on her chest. While Frairen coughed, hacked, gurgled, and choked, Himmel pounded his shot down with ease, though he nearly fell off of Timothy's shoulders in the process. Only the swift free hand of the human kept the Poit from eating the hardwood floor. Not that the Poit really noticed. Zeterin poured the shot into the free skin of his hood, much like he would a regular drink, due to it being the final one they would all have together. As he took the shot in one go, he let it swish around in his mouth as he savored the flavor before swallowing. Beside him, Frairen let out another hacking cough, scrabbling for a little glass of water near her in order to put out the fire in her chest. It has beautiful flavor, Zeterin said with an appreciative hiss, patting his chest, and it tickles warmth all the way down. What is this? Rye whiskey, Alex said, having already sipped her shot away into her body and enjoying the warmth it brought her as well. Frairen was chugging the glass of water with small gasps of breath, her free hands puffing at the hem of her uniform top. I'm on fire. Why am I burning on the inside? Is this another one of your human poisons? The table had a chuckle at her expense. Both Alex and Zeterin helping the Yorpal to her feet. Getting her to stay on her feet was a challenge, as all she had the mental strength to do was billow out her uniform top. She coated both Alex and Zeterin with her pheromones, making them both either sneeze or have to shake their heads to clear away the mental fuzz it was putting into them. Frairen whined and puffed her uniform top all the way to the local pizzeria, and by the time they pushed through the front double doors, Alex was feeling a little hot under her own collar, while Zeterin kept having to put his hood down, both of them wanting to get rid of Frairen and stop having to prop her up, or at least make her stop billowing her damn uniform top. Frairen only found comfort in her second favorite sin, and only that made her stop incessantly puffing the hem of her uniform top. Cherry cola. Only with the ice-cold, sugary cola flowing down her throat did her body cease to burn, And she finally sighed out in relief. Alex and Zetrin did too, giving each other quizzical glances as none of them had any idea the Yorple even did that. Timothy, on the other hand, had a happily snoozing Himmel on his shoulders, the Poit's long hair falling over the side of the human's face and tickling his ear. Pizza was ordered, snapping Himmel awake instantly when the smell of bubbling cheese hit his nose, and the little group of recruits tucked into a fine after-bar chow, though Frairen demanded another pie be ordered, as she now was quite hungry. Zetrin preferred to consume a salad, as he had no love for pizza and found the flavor of cheese close to that of vomit, but politely enjoyed the little buzz he had going while his platoon mates enjoyed their meal. When Himmel had consumed his 6th slice, Frairen her 12th, Alex her 5th, Timothy his own 6th, and Zetrin having scooped his salad bowl clean, they all began their walk back towards where the cattle cars would be arriving. "I thought that was quite nice," Zetrin said aloud to them as they were waiting by the road. "Do we get to do this every pass?" Alex nodded, pushing the once again snoozing Himmel back onto Timothy's shoulders. "We humans always do. We celebrate time off with drinking, even in the civilian sector." Zetrin happily clapped his hands while Frairen grimaced, her belly stuffed full with pizza and cherry cola. "If we do, I'm not drinking the poison in the little glass or that bubbling concoction," Frairen said with a growl, the pizza only slightly helping her mood. Timothy bumped her with his elbow. "Free, they're part of military tradition. As long as you train here, you're going to have to drink at least one of them." "Man," Frairen whined, pinning her ears back as the cattle car hissed to a stop in front of them, ready to take them back to the training barracks.
"I want one more rep," the human said in a professional tone, looming over Nalili with her usual grim face. Nalili was struggling, his avian-scaled arms quaking with the weight of the Olympic bar he was trying to heft up onto its resting hooks. "I am trying of lifting." "Get that bar up. If you can't manage this and you can't manage our gravity," the human said, tapping his pen on the clipboard he held. Nalili was an Optican, an avian species of spacefaring peoples that made their homes on multiple planets of the Sub-Far sector. Their minds were sharp, as were their technological advances, becoming so advanced that many Optican had never even seen grass. This was in part due to how they converted their planets basically into hab units, having no need of farming or agriculture due to their output of parts, machines, ships, and other such doodads. These were traded for high credit values, allowing them to just buy their food with ease. It didn't help that their planets were small and not very dense, leading to both light gravity and very little space for agrarian activities. Their lack of resources propelled them into space at an extremely fast rate as they developed, and they managed to start harvesting nearby asteroids just in time to avoid their own society collapsing and dying. It had been a tight race, but they managed to just pull it off. Now they were an industrial powerhouse and made the finest engines in their side of space, and were masters at harvesting asteroids for their dense materials. This harvesting technology is what led them being invited to Earth, as the humans themselves were struggling with material harvesting and having proper ships. With the demise of the insectoid Daramir by human hands, a lot of planets owed the humans a favor, and had found it rather annoying to have the little iron monkeys running around on their ships during the war. It was more due to humans not being able to manufacture their own ships than anything else, and they were already propped up by the Optican harvesting the resources for them during the late stages of the conflict. It was the humans that kept the Daramir from destroying and consuming the Optican in the first place, and the avian species owed a great debt to the humans. Though, the Optican thought the humans rather physically boring as far as a species went and couldn't help but feel superior to them. The Optican had avian scales on their arms and legs, short talons on their avian feet, a short feathered tail, and double thumbs on their clawed hands. Their eyes were wide and sharp, coming in all manner of colors, while their hair was more like fine feathers that went all the way down their necks. They had skins sort of like the humans, but around the outside of their thighs and calves were more fine feathers, and their faces were elongated around the nose, remnants of their ancestors having beaks that eventually smoothed out into hard-plated noses with soft lips underneath. One thing the humans had in spades was muscle and strength, owing to their planet, while the Optican were a fine-boned, fine-muscled people that would rather pay mercenaries to fight for them instead. The Optican believed the humans were just pumping their soldiers full of chemicals to make them so strong, and held the firm belief that they were just dumb brutes who were a simple anvil for the Daramir to crash against. Opticans had no idea just how weak they were until they were invited to Earth, and a ship had crashed on its journey down to the surface. The pilots had been overwhelmed by the gravity of the planet, causing them to not only struggle to control the craft, but most of them actually blacked out despite their dampeners. The Opticans had never even considered that they may have been too weak for the gravity of the planet, as other spacefaring people had already landed and were running around the lush planet. Investigations over the craft even confirmed the arrogance of the pilots, who had switched off the warnings that skittered across their flight panels. It was disastrous, but thankfully the ships hauling around the actual engineers and dignitaries were able to punch back out into space in time, avoiding a far more serious tragedy. This led to a conundrum as the Optican ships lingered in space, but they had come up with a plan quickly. Using their far more advanced ships and technology, they sprinted back to their main homeworld of Subfar True and quickly set up a portable space station, then dragged it back to Earth within record time. The Optican glowed and rustled their feathers in the shock from the humans, as they did nothing but praise the Optican for both their ingenuity and quick thinking, and this did nothing but increase the positive reception from the humans. After all, if this species could slam together an entire space station and then drop it in orbit within only a few months, what else could they do? The biggest problem was, of course, how weak the Optican were. They had been slowly made brittle over time in both space and on their weak gravity planets, never even considering using their artificial gravity machines to strengthen themselves over who knew how many hundreds of years. Humans found their feeble bodies rather distasteful, and wondered if the avian species could even keep up with them. The other species, like the Yorpal and Poit, were struggling as it was, but they at least had some muscle on them and could handle Earth's gravity by default. While the station orbited around Earth using complex atmospheric engines to anchor it in place, the humans set about toughening the Optican up. The humans introduced the avian aliens to something they had never seen before, and the Optican at first thought the humans were torturing them. The humble gymnasium was set up by humans shuffling equipment into the station via the ships provided by the Optican, and personal trainers set to getting these bird people into shape. At first, the obvious problem was a lack of leg muscles and core chain, so that is where they started for the first few weeks, but switched to arms. The Optican were not prepared for the insane amount of arm exercises the humans knew, throwing everything from kettlebells to barbells at them and working them through a rotation of exercises. The second problem was that humans could not adjust to such low gravity, one trainer accidentally launching a kettlebell into the roof decking of the gymnasium. It was still there, too. The station had to be split into two sections with two different gravity settings. One for the humans to relax in, and one for the Opticans so they could toughen up and survive. Eventually, the humans had to start wearing slightly magnetized shoes, just enough to catch the metal under the wood decking, so that they could stop losing their footing in the low gravity. Nalili was a gold plume engineer, a high rank amongst his kind, and he was suffering under the weight of the arm exercises. His mottled green feathers quaked while he worked through hammer curls, alternating cross curls, preacher curls, chest flies, reverse curls, front raises. Just how many arm muscles did these humans have? Today was something called a bench press, and while Nalili had mastered the English language in only a few days, he thought it should have been called the guillotine instead. This had made another French human instructor laugh. Come on, up you come, his human said, tapping his pin on the bar so it made light ringing noises. It's only 60 pounds. Up, up, up. Nalili struggled so hard he was cartwheeling his legs, pushing with all his might. When he finally locked out his elbows, he gasped out, 5! There you go, the human said, slightly pulling back on the bar with a single hand and helping Nalili rack it. How are we feeling, Optican? Nalili's chest was heaving, sweat pouring down his skin and feathers. I am feeling like death. Good, the human said with a chuckle, then held out his hand to help Nalili up. You're doing better than the leg exercises. Nalili puffed out a laugh as he took the human's single-thumbed hand, and the human hoisted him up with ease. His name was Stephen, a hard name to say since Nalili kept saying Stephen, but he was kind at least. The other humans seemed far more strict and intense, so he must have lucked out. All right, we have to do another set of lumberjack squats. These are gonna work your legs and your arms, Stephen said, pointing to the landmine bar in the corner of the large gym where nearly 100 Optican were working out. The other 200 either sleeping, eating, or laying face down on massage tables and crying. Nalili put on a brave face, then wiped a towel along his cheeks. Okay, we are doing the lumberjack. Stephen chuckled, walking towards the landmine bar while muttering, We are doing the lumberjack indeed. Perhaps mastered had been a strong word, he thought. He knew what all the words meant, but speaking in the same pattern was an issue that both he and the other Opticans were struggling with as well. Apparently, the humans found it cute, and weren't even trying to get the Opticans to change it, even demanding they keep their speech pattern. Nalili's feet clicked along the wooden floor, a favored material of the Opticans since they lacked actual trees nowadays on their planets, and he took up his position on the bar. He had to support the end of the bar on his chest with his palms under it, which was already making the feathers on his arms shake, then squat down, holding this pose for a few heartbeats before standing back up. His leg muscles screamed with the effort, and managed to do 20 reps before Stephen lunged forward, taking the bar in one hand and catching Nalili in the other. Whoa there, Skipper, you can't go that hard yet, Stephen said as Nalili heaved in a breath, sparks popping in front of his eyes. When his workout was done for the day, Nalili went to his favorite area of the station, a large glass window that let him look down at Earth. Looking at all of that green, Nalili murmured to himself, and he couldn't help but smile. He had never actually felt grass before, and something deep inside of him ached for it. He wanted to go running through the prairies and meadows he had seen in books and video recordings, swim through water that was clean and fresh, and lounge below a shade tree in the warm sun. Nalili sighed out to himself and sat down in a chair, resting his chin on his clawed fingers. Imagine of being able to waking up and just go walking in the grass. It's nice, a voice said behind him, and Nalili turned. Joseph, another one of the humans on board but not a trainer, walked around and took a seat beside Nalili on the row, leaning back and crossing his legs. There's the mountain meadows of Colorado, the desert shrub of New Mexico, the deep woods of the Appalachians, all kinds of places down there. Of course, you could also go to Europe, stroll along the high-altitude grasslands of Switzerland, the tundras of Russia, or just splash in the ocean for a bit, Joseph said, pointing down to the planet in the general area of where these locations were. We are of only having steel and concrete, Nalili said in wonder, leaning forward in earnest as he looked down at South America. What is of being in that landmass? Joseph tilted his head down at where he thought Nalili was pointing. Ah, that there's all jungle. Jungle, Nalili murmured, rolling the word around in his mouth. What is of jungle? Joseph pulled out his phone and started scrolling through pictures of the Amazon. We almost lost this place, you know that? You guys came in clutch and started feeding us resources during the war, and we were able to completely pull away from harvesting our planet. Hell, we were even able to bring back some of the extinct species with the help of your pulled gene regeneration technology. You were almost of losing all of your jungle? Nalili said in alarm, his feathers flaring in panic. Is jungle of okay? Joseph laughed, patting Nalili's shoulders. Don't you worry. The jungle is doing better than ever. Frankly, we owe you guys a lot. We were about to start cracking open our planet before you guys stepped in. Nalili felt pride in what his people had done, in helping preserve this little slice of heaven that birthed some of the strongest soldiers he had ever seen in battle. Where should I have going first? My personal answer? Joseph said, leaning forward with Nalili and pointing down to the planet. You should go to Crested Butte during the wildflower season. It has always been my favorite memory. Wildflowers? Nalili said in excitement, jumping to his feet with his enthusiasm managing to tamp down the quick burst of soreness in his limbs. Are there of shade trees too? Joseph smiled. Yes, there are shade trees, plus a nice view of the mountains. Nalili stood in front of the window for a long time, his eyes darting back and forth across his planet of paradise. After 10 minutes, he looked at Joseph. How close am I of being ready? If you bust your ass and pass the gravity test and remember to take your calcium pills, 2 weeks? Joseph replied, checking his data slate. Nalili grimaced. He hated those damn calcium pills. They tasted like dead animals and chalk, but they were designed to enhance and strengthen the anemic bone mass of the Optican. He nodded his head, though, then fist-pumped the air as he turned around to Joseph. Of 2 weeks, then, I will be of completing it. That's the spirit, Joseph said with a wide grin. I'll let Stephen know. Only the thoughts of walking through grass kept Nalili going, pushing through the leg press exercises, the squats, leg curls, leg extensions, low rowing, and those disgusting calcium pills. It was frustrating in some ways. Nalili could think circles around these humans all day long, but was just a mote of strength compared to their raw might. A lot of the Opticans challenged the humans to do the same workouts as them, and were quickly humbled by the trainers putting on a show of raw strength. The female Opticans were really intrigued when the male and female humans took off their shirts to show the avian species how the muscles worked, and a few of the male Opticans had to avert their gaze out of embarrassment. Nalili kept himself focused on his own goals, and after his 2 weeks of hard work, he was ready to take on the gravity room. There was artificial gravity on the station, set to Optican standards on their side in order to help them get used to working out at a far easier level, and it was a paltry level of technology that the Opticans could have done in their sleep. But the gravity room is where things took a turn. This room could be cranked up to the actual gravity of Earth, and a cocky Optican had broken both of his legs trying to attempt the room after just a week of working out. The room had obstacles within it, which were embarrassingly simple. Step over a small wall, crawl under a few poles, walk, jog, and run to certain points marked by color-coded markers. Lift simple objects and place them on a shelf, operate ship controls, and, worst of all, survive 3 Gs of force in a device that spun around on a set of wheels. The spinning device honestly terrified Nalili. They had survived for years using directional force dampeners on their ships, making quick turns in space easy and reducing the risk of injury. Humans? Their fighter jets and their pilots could survive up to 10 Gs. This had been pivotal in decimating the Daramir during the in-atmosphere dogfights, and everyone else just simply assumed the human pilots had G-dampening equipment. Nalili remembered the collective intake of breath when both the Opticans and everyone else learned the humans were tanking raw Gs in just a flight suit, and it had caused a great stirring among the other people of the stars. Nalili remembered when a Poit had tried to ride passenger in one of the jets, and had nearly died during a 7G turn while the pilot had just laughed at 7 Gs. Now he was going to have to walk at a single G, something the other races did with ease. He had to be strong and make the Optican proud. Nalili stood in a line with the other Optican as they were led in 10 at a time. and it didn't take long for his fellow Optican to start coming out of the gravity room on stretchers. Thankfully, no one was breaking their bones this time, but they were simply crashing down to the deck in exhaustion. After 110 failures, Nalili was the first of his stick to go in. Of course, the humans would call a line of people a damn stick. It was so like them. He remembered when a human had thrown another human a spoon and everyone had to duck and cover during breakfast. Brute strength and brute simplicity of mind. Nalili noticed the gravity room had changed from before, and the control stick test was first up on the line. Nalili stood at the front of the line as they entered the room. Then a warning buzzer chimed a few times, alerting the Opticans that the gravity was going to change. "Stay strong for our people," Nalili called out in their own vibrating language, then exhaled out harshly as the gravity hit them all at once. Nalili's eyes nearly vibrated as he forced himself upright, and he felt his newly bulging leg muscles straining against the gravity. Behind him, someone fell to the ground with a cry, but he didn't look back. "Of crested butte," Nalili muttered out in English, stepping forward with a sharp exhale as he sat in the seat. "Prairie flowers and shady trees." The simulation started, and Nalili powered through it, landing the cargo ship with little trouble. The light turned green, and Nalili sat up, his core muscles flexing as he did, and he soldiered on to the next step. It was a 3-pound box sitting on the ground, and he had to lift it into a green square on the shelf. Nalili did what he saw the humans do, pounding his chest while exhaling and grunting, then squatted down with perfect form and grabbed the box. His leg and arm muscles bulged as he lifted the box, sweat pouring down his skin and feathers as soon as he stood upright. He blinked away the sweat, setting the box down on the shelf. The square lit up green, then tossed the box back down onto the floor by tilting upwards, letting the box slide off towards where it roughly was before being picked up by Nalili. Next, there were 5 knee-high walls, and Nalili had to jump over them while jogging. He was breathing hard now, wiping at the sweat on his face with the sleeve of his workout suit, but he started forward anyway. His nails made heavy clacks on the wooden floor as he hopped over the small walls, grunting as he came down onto the decking, but he made it over the 5th wall with only a small stumble, quickly coming back up to his feet and leaning backwards, breathing out tersely. "Of grass bathed in sun, water of cool blue and stone," Nalili whispered to himself, sniffing as his body struggled to maintain its composure. Next was the walk-jog-run, and Nalili started walking without pause, swinging his arms like Stephen had taught him to. He heard a chime ring above him after a good while of walking, letting him know it was time to jog. He breathed out harshly and started to jog, and the sweat came on in force. By the time he had to run, his feathers were dripping beads of the stuff onto the ground, and he left a little trail behind him. His lungs hurt, he had a stitch in his side, and his knees ached something terrible, but he would not falter here. He ran with all his might, swinging his arms and pumping his legs just like Stephen had said to, and he closed his eyes. Nalili kept his eyes squeezed shut, his lungs burning as he drew in the cold air of the space station, and gasped out loudly when the chime came again.
"Gold Plume Engineer Nalili, you have a 5-minute break,"
a voice called out over the intercom, and Nalili sank down onto the floor, his chest pumping up and down as he tried to catch his breath.
"You shouldn't have done that,"
came a chuckling voice over the intercom, and Nalili recognized it was Stephen.
"What goes down?"
"Must have coming up," Nalili cried out, now laughing as he recognized his blunder. He had laid down, which meant he had to stand up eventually. A female Optigan came crashing down next to him, her breath heaving into her lungs with a wheeze as her bright purple feathers vibrated from the effort of her body.
"By all means, take a breather, Silver Plume Engineer Captic,"
the voice said over the intercom, and they all heard the crisp start of laughter before the mic cut off. "Of thanking," Keptic cried out, her heavy chest so soaked that Nalili could see the complete outline of her sports bra, a handy piece of clothing that all the female Optican were wearing. "This sucks," Nalili said to her in their native tongue, and he leaned up with a long, painful groan. Keptic nodded. "I agree. It's worse that we have to sometimes wait for our turn at the tasks. Why I try to get so far ahead. I'm not sure what's worse, really." Both of them chuckled.
1 minute, Gold Plume Engineer Nalili,
the voice said above them. Nalili waved his hand. Yeah, of hearing, he groaned, slowly getting back up to his feet and wobbled slightly towards the next obstacle. This was a new test, but one he already knew. The water bags. Before him were 2 one-gallon jugs of water, in plastic bottles of all things, and he had to pick them up, press them over his head, and place them back down, repeating the exercise 5 times. It was a struggle in Earth gravity, but the 5th rep was so tiring he had to let go early, the jug splashing down to the ground with hollow thumps of water. Of nuts, Nalili muttered in English, always having found that phrase funny. A human stepped out from a doorway, holding 2 new jugs of water in one hand and a mop in the other. Nalili gave a short, dry laugh. You are showing off. I am not, the human said with a laugh, then waved the jugs of water at Nalili. I've got this. Go on and complete your tasks. He is so casual about it, Nalili thought to himself bitterly, watching the ease of the human's movements, but he did move on to the next challenge. There were only 2 left, the crawl and the wheeled machine. He got through the crawling challenge with a lot of huffing and puffing and trying to keep his tail from getting caught under his feet, and came out of the other side just as sweaty as when he had started. Now there was the car, sitting there all innocent looking despite the terror it brought to his chest. His heart hammered violently as he thumped down into the seat, strapping himself into the harness while breathing up towards the ceiling. He realized all of a sudden he was the first Optican to even make it this far, as a little dial on the wall read 0 below a sentence that read, Opticans have arrived to challenge the station. The others had numbers, but this was still 0. At the far end of the wall near a door, another dial said 0, while its phrase read, Opticans who have passed in victory. Welcome to Earth. Nalili glued his eyes to the sign, reading it under his breath. Welcome to Earth. He was so close, and his eyes widened with the realization.
Gold Plume Engineer Nalili, prepare for your final test.
The voice rang out from above him, and all the other Optican paused, turning in surprise to see Nalili at the far end of the room.
Area clear. Begin speed test.
The wheeled car shuddered, and Nalili sucked in a breath. Of pretty flowers, colors of blue and purple. Nalili whispered to himself in a panic as the car began to speed up, the wind catching his feathers. Of blue sky, and sun of warmth and comfort. The wind began howling in a shallow close to the skull ears, the feather tufts on them rustling in the wind. Of soft grass and smells of rain. His vision was beginning to blur as a small screen in front of him read out 2 Gs, and his body felt like it was going to collapse. Darkness ebbed in at the corner of his eyes, but Nalili squeezed his thigh and stomach muscles, remembering what human fighter pilots did to combat the hard Gs. 2.5 Gs. He squeezed, then released. Squeezed, then released while quietly shrieking to himself, Of running through meadows with palms touching grass heads. 3 Gs, the screen read out, then began a 10-second countdown. Nalili squeezed and released with all his might, closing his eyes as he focused on not passing out. He couldn't fail here, not now, not so close to the end. He felt like he was going to finally pass out when he felt the car begin to slow, and his eyes snapped open, his mouth gaping and sucking in loud, shuddering breaths. He stared wide-eyed as the car came to a stop, his body shaking from the pure adrenaline running through his veins, and he heard a soft ding from the wall. Nalili looked, and there upon the counter now stood a 1, and the light had turned green. Just of walking out? Nalili asked Josephine, the female human holding open the door for him. She shrugged. I mean, you could crawl, but I think walking is better. Nalili laughed and leaned out of the wheeled all-terrain vehicle, his taloned feet clicking on the roadway. It had taken a few more weeks of getting used to the Earth gravity side of the station, as well as a few more tests, but he was finally here. He had asked for a single day before he started work, and it was happily granted. The lovely brown-haired woman named Josephine had even volunteered to drive him out to this little grassy area of Crested Butte, and he was finally here. Nalili started to cry as he stepped forward, the hard gravity of Earth feeling feather light as he stepped out into the grass. He felt his soul fly as he let out a sob, coming down gently onto his knees and running his hands along the flowers. To think that humans almost had to lose all of this to make war materials, to become like his own planet. Nalili let out a wet laugh as he leaned down and sniffed at the flowers, their scents filling his head like the sweetest perfume. "Is it like you imagined?" Josephine asked as she stepped beside him, her hands in her pockets as she looked around at the mountain view. Nalili laughed again, sniffing before standing up beside Josephine and holding his hands to his face. "No." "No?" Josephine asked quizzically, pulling a tissue out of her pocket and handing it to Nalili. Nalili took it, dabbing at his eyes as he looked out into the ocean of waving green grass, rustling trees, and sweet mountain wind. "No, is of so much more." At Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, Frairen slammed down her patrol cap, yelling out in frustration as she ripped another tick from her dull yellow fur, while Himmel and Zetrin rolled their eyes nearby. "This planet is a hellhole! How do humans even live here?"
"Settle down, class," Miss Rimiki said loudly, clapping her long clawed hands together. "Come now, it's time to learn about Earth." Her students all groaned at the prospect of another planetary lesson, and she pursed her bright yellow lips together. It had been hard for her, a Zumra, to get used to teaching. Her race all learned extremely quickly via text, being able to read more than one book with their 2 sets of slit-pupiled eyes and highly complex brains. Her race's council leaders currently wanted to keep humans at arm's length. When they had first made contact, human delegates had spread word far and wide of the beautiful 4-eyed dragon people of the stars, and the amount of attention her people got made the council leaders uncomfortable. To be fair, they were all flattered at the response they got from the images of their people. But the humans had an eagerness about them that made the Zumra engage them at an extremely slow and measured pace. Whether it was their smooth skin, their head fronds, their short, thick tails, or their refined features, humans always seemed to fawn over them. It was reasoned that at one point humans may have had their own dragon-like creatures on Earth that died from an unknown illness, and the Zumra had spent years researching the draconic images found all over the blue and green marble of a world. This led many of their scholars to surmise that humans suffered from an infatuation with dragon-like entities and found themselves falling into the uncomfortable crosshairs of humanity. At the current point in time, Miss Rimiki wished the other people of the stars before her held the same sense of respect and found that the mixed classroom held little care for her teachings. It also may have been their age. She hated teaching adults. "Isn't Earth's history just made up?" a young blue Yorble mused, balancing a digital stylus on her nose lazily. "I heard they all just live in giant gyms and are all born in vats." A bright pink opticon rolled his eyes. "If they were born in vats, they wouldn't have navels." "This is not about how humans are made. This is about their world," Miss Rimiki stated, frowning prettily and wrinkling her wide nose in annoyance. "We will be going over human cultures and biology later during our studies on the cultures of the Cinderol Confederation." There was another collective groan, and Miss Rimiki placed her hands on her round hips. "Really now, this is supposed to prime you all for your future professions. How are you going to know what to expect when visiting other planets? I'm sure you've all heard of the folly that came before the Opticon's visit to Earth." Miss Rimiki growled out, now crossing her arms. All of the Opticon in the classroom grimaced, remembering all too well the splash they made by their first pilots burying their craft into the dirt of Earth. The same young Yorble balancing her stylus snatched it off her nose when another of her fellows spoke up, a male Yorble with fur like firelight. "That's not even going to change anything, though. They may be working out their muscles on that stupid orbital platform, but their hearts still grew too weak from their lack of gravity, or even use thereof. If the Opticans even run too much, they can risk heart failure. May as well put them in pressure suits as they frolic around the flowers, the blue female Yorple said, grinning at the male fangedly. Before Miss Rimiki could make them be quiet, multiple Optican came up onto their feet in outrage, despite the sudden exertion, making them break out into a sweat. We do not need suits to be on Earth, the pink male Optican called out, slamming his clawed hand as hard as he dared onto the table they all shared per row. We can earn our way through strength like the rest of you. A yellow female Optican rounded on the blue female Yorple. All of us have been working out, entire base converted into gravity chambers, so we can toughen ourselves. Took you long enough. All you did was hide and mine asteroids the entire war, the blue female Yorple growled out, leaning back in her seat smugly. Miss Rimiki slammed her thick hands against her own table, rattling her data slates and causing her mantle of jewelry to rattle against her shoulders. That is enough! Sit down now! I will not have this decisive talk in my classroom! All of the Yorple and Optican saw how Miss Rimiki's head fronds were expanding out, vibrating with her rage, and they all either leaned forward in their seats or sat back down. Zumra may have been a bookish race, but they still had the ability to attack the mind should they get riled up enough. Miss Rimiki cleared her throat, smoothing down the front of her teaching robes and resettling her mantle of duty. Right. The Carlake, Poit, and Jin within the room looked at each other with awkward side glances, the Jin being the most confused. They were new to the Cinderal Confederation, the four-armed, triangular-headed race, having been nearly destroyed completely during the war against the Dermir. Like the others, they were seeking to pay back the humans for just barely keeping their culture alive, and numbered only in the low millions from the billions they were at their peak. One of the braver ones held up his hand, his eyes barely visible underneath the curved masks they all wore, as they did not show their face to anyone but their future or current spouse. So, Earth? Yes, Earth, Miss Rimiki said, turning and tapping the data screen so it came back to life. Earth is what many classify as a death world. Is that because of how boring it is? The blue female Yorple spoke up again, and the males around her rolled their eyes this time. Miss Rimiki spun around, her head fronds out and deployed, and she fixed the Yorple with a steely glare. Miss Mirac! Mirac clapped her hands to her head, her body suddenly filled with immeasurable dread. Wait! Mirac began to wail, her fingers digging into the fur of her head as Miss Rimiki focused her will on the insolent Yorple. Be quiet, Miss Mirac, Miss Rimiki said firmly over the cries of the Yorple, her draconic fronds quavering. Mirac was writhing on the ground now as she cried out, Okay, I'm sorry, stop! Stop it! Miss Rimiki's fronds began to slowly stop quavering and deflated, laying down neatly against her head and neck as she looked around the room. Anyone else wishing to disrupt my class? Many heads shook back and forth, the Jinn wondering to themselves just what the hell they got themselves into. Miss Rimiki cleared her throat, smoothing down her robes again as she gestured toward the screen. As I stated, many classify Earth as a death world due to its abnormally high gravity, inhabitants, and their culture. Humans, as we all know, are an extremely militant race when compared to the rest of us, and hone their skills for war by battling amongst themselves for thousands of years, though some speculate longer. Their gravity has allowed them to grow extremely thick-muscled, and in thus their strength is also quite high. Those of the Confederation who are currently training with the humans have made note that they tire far quicker and cannot last as long in combat trials in comparison to the humans. Humans currently training on other worlds in agreement with the military exchange program have made a mockery of them, dominating the training with ease, Miss Rimiki said, tapping her fingers together and making the data screen flick through multiple pictures of humans throwing Yorple like sacks of grain through the air, or bending Zumra nearly in half during melee combat trials. While clever, they lack the focused intelligence that the rest of us possess, but that is not to mistake humans as stupid. They are highly dangerous predatory beings that can think extremely quickly and make calculations on the move that even the Opticans struggle with. They merely lag behind in raw intelligence, but there is a notion that they may not lag for long. A juniper-colored Yorple raised his hand, and Miss Rimiki pointed to him. Then why haven't humans taken over the Confederation then? If they're so powerful, then why not do what the Dirmir tried? It is a fair question, Miss Rimiki said with a smile, then tapped the pad of her middle finger to her thumb, the screen switching over to another set of slides showing humans laughing and smiling with other races. They are an extremely sociable race and appear to like us, so they are not being outwardly aggressive. Some humans have coined the phrase take and give when it comes to working with them, and they are only outwardly aggressive should they receive aggression in the first place. A female djinn raised her topmost arm, giving her little hand a wave. Is that why the Zamra have a non-social engagement clause with the humans? Miss Rimiki blushed, having not assumed the djinn were even aware of that. She cleared her throat before speaking, lacing her fingers together. Well, when we first made contact, the humans were enamored with us, and our council of leadership feared for... I heard they were seducing too many Zamra women, a Kerlake said with raised scaly brows, his head giving a little shake of humor. Half the landing party went off mission and have yet to even leave Earth, leading Zamra leadership to panic. They were causing social issues, yes, Miss Rimiki said shortly, giving her head a shake because her tendrils were starting to slightly flare in embarrassment. Our council of leadership feared that it would cause a social death. How curious, the female djinn murmured, tilting her masked face slightly. So a death world in more than one way. That is due to the sociability of humans, Miss Rimiki agreed, tapping through more slides slowly to let the students look. The more dour-faced scholars believe that humans are akin to an infection and will work their ways into all levels of society amongst the races of the stars. However, despite this outlook, all those who meet humans appear to find them good company, and it matters not how the other races look. Just last week, one of the gelatinous Orgur, they themselves made a human friend, and it dragged the entire race out of an emotional slump. A point raised his hand. Aren't the Orgur just a race of intelligent jelly balls that live in suits? I heard they have tentacles that work little nodes in their suits to make it move. They are a highly advanced invertebrate peoples that were only just recently found on their planet. Of course, no one wanted to really work with balls of slime with tentacles, so they have been ostracized by the races at large. Humanity, however, finds them curious. Miss Rimiki mused, but then turned back to the data screen. Besides its gravity, Earth has multiple biodomes due to humans not seeking to control their planet's weather or temperature. As you all well know, the Confederation at large practices tempering to make sure all planets are as comfortable as possible for all those visiting. Earth, however, does not do this. Miss Rimiki waved her hand at the screen, and it zoomed in towards a flat image of Earth and its zones of temperature. Some areas can go as low as 0.35 chot, or negative 135 degrees Fahrenheit, as to human measurements. On the other hand, it has been recorded as being as hot as 34 chot, or 134 degrees Fahrenheit. They don't live in those areas, do they? A male Yorpal asked, staring up at the screen in confusion. And why would they just allow temperatures like this? I couldn't tell you why they allow it. Miss Rimiki shrugged, speaking matter-of-factly. But some of them actually do live in such locations, or vacation there for the challenge of surviving it. This is not even a new phenomenon, as humans have been raging against the weather of their planet for nearly as long as they have been fighting themselves. But why? A djinn asked, not even bothering to raise his hand. Miss Rimiki pursed her thick lips for a moment, then shrugged again. Maybe due to the fact that they master all the other predators of their planet, and see the planet itself as their last remaining challenge. This is seen in their sports as well, many of which are outlawed for other members of the Confederation to try. What kind of sports? A female djinn called out in excitement, nearly coming to her feet. Is there wrestling? Miss Rimiki giggled politely, quickly tapping her fingers to her palm to switch slides over to human sports. Oh yes, quite a few that are all very much allowed by the Confederation, but extreme human sports are outlawed for their death rate. They have sports where they die? The djinn asked again. Quite a few, actually. Humans are known to climb or dive down into caves where there is a risk of dying to crush and lack of oxygen, climbing up rock faces with no safety equipment, riding waves of water on nothing but planks of wood, riding fearsome beasts with nothing more than a rope to keep them anchored. racing around in combustion engine vehicles, leaping from great heights with only a sheet of nylon to arrest their fall. Miss Rimiki listed, showing slides of each sport until she came to a slide of 2 bloody humans in a netted ring. There is even extreme sparring where 2 humans, male and females alike, batter each other to the point of either running out of time or one of them being knocked unconscious. Miss Rimiki grimaced at the slide of a female human bleeding profusely from the face, then switching to another slide. Humans may be trying to beat death itself, running out of enemies that are unbeatable. You said they ride great beasts, a point asked, her hair glittering gold in the light of the classroom. What kind of beasts? I thought all planets ridded themselves of large predators and such for safety reasons. Miss Rimiki actually laughed. Yes, this is true, but humans do not abide by such rules. They believe it is, how did they say, unfair. Unfair? The Poit snorted. What is unfair about evolution? We Poit destroyed every predator and animal larger than a boovum so that our planet is completely safe. Why even keep big animals alive in cages? Cages? Miss Rimiki asked with raised brow ridges. You think humans keep the big animals in cages? The Poit blanched, her fully yellow eyes going wide. They're in cages, right? Miss Rimiki rapidly tapped her thumb to bring up the correct slide, and the class recoiled. What is that? A Jin called out, standing up out of his chair and taking a few steps backwards. This is called a grizzly bear, and is a predator on Earth that still roams wild in the forests, Miss Rimiki said with a smirk, seeing the fear in their eyes as their bravado left them. It can reach speeds of over 35 miles per hour, Earth measurements, or 6.5 opsecs. This means that it can even chase down and catch Yorpal running at their top speed. All of the Yorpal in the room looked stunned, if not outright horrified. Miss Rimiki continued on. They have a bite strength that can cleave straight through human bones, and we all know how tough those are. This animal is called a lion, and it can run up to 37 miles per hour in short bursts during ambushes, and has the same bite strength as the grizzly bear. Then there are cheetahs, a land predator that can get up to 80 miles per hour in speed, and has a bite force under that of the lion, and it does not stop there. Miss Rimiki kept clicking through the major land predators of Earth, then to the ones that lurk under the water as well. Killer whales, sharks, and barracuda in the sea, wolves, hippos, and tigers on land, all roaming in the open, with no cages or gates. This is not accounting for the kinds of animals humans keep as pets, and they are known to keep both canine and feline predators as such. Why do they even leave these things alive? They're monsters! A shaking male Yorpal cried out, his tawny yellow fur shaking. What is the point? Miss Rimiki laughed calmly, shaking her head, as she still didn't believe humans had told her this directly. They keep these creatures around because if they weren't there, it would be too boring in nature. The room sat quiet for a moment as the words sunk in, all while Miss Rimiki nodded her head. Yes, I know what you're thinking, and they truly do believe this. Miss Rimiki turned around, her thick tail nudging the desk slightly forward, and she turned back around with a new data chip, plugging it into the data screen. Nature would lose, as they say, its pizzazz, the extra spark that makes it just a little bit more special. She quickly tapped her palm with her finger, bringing up multiple pictures of prowling Earth predators on both land and ocean. Humans believe that their world is healthier with these predators in place. It is by far the most perplexing node of the human culture, and has befuddled the Confederation ever since they joined. Humans not only seek to leave their world as untouched as possible, but seek to keep the natural order of it intact, even if that means deaths of their own race at the whims of these animals. Humans have been chased, killed, and eaten by these land predators before, some even as recent as last week, when a human hiker was chased and killed by a black bear. And then they killed all the black bears, right? A female Carlaken asked, holding her hands out, palms up. If the animals killed a human and proved themselves a threat, then they were removed, yes? Miss Rimiki nodded. Oh, yes, they found the bear and killed it, but only that one bear. That doesn't make any sense, the Carlagan murmured, tapping at her chin. What is the point of just sacrificing yourself to these animals? Miss Rimiki exhaled as she thought, tapping at the data screen with a claw. I think they are as much a part of their planet as everything else, and I am one of the few who believe that humans do gain power from their planet. Those who think the same as I do have come to a conclusion that humans need to keep their planet in as much of its natural state as possible in order to keep being as strong as they are. With danger still lurking around every bush and shrub of grass, they don't fall complacent. With toothsome predators lurking beneath the waves, they don't assume they are safe even when standing in a stream. If a human falls prey to the predators of old, they are seen as weak, and the planet itself has filtered them out. While the weather and gravity are bad and worthy of having Earth labeled a death planet, it is the presence of these land predators that truly makes the warning labels stick. Miss Rimiki pointed to a few of the Yorpal sitting near the front of her classroom. You Yorpal have eradicated all of your ancient predators, and new alike. And this will stick with you. You will believe you are safe and sound on Earth, and won't notice the wolves creeping up on you. Wolves? A Yorpal asked, and Miss Rimiki tapped her pinky finger to the broad hand muscle of her thumb, pulling up an article of the Confederation newsletter. Wolves. 3 Yorpal were found dead by a wolf attack, having gone out camping without a guide. 3 engineers were found mauled to death inside their tent and partially eaten, Miss Rimiki said sternly, pointing a hand at the crime scene photos showing the dismembered victims. They ignored the rules and the warnings, did not take a human guide, and thought themselves too advanced to fall prey to some little human animal. This is only the latest, and the Confederation is wavering still on whether or not to ban the other races from venturing outside military bases or major cities. A female Yorpal stared up at the images with open horror on her face, her pawed hands coming toward her cheeks. They were eaten. Eaten, Miss Rimiki said in a low tone. This event happened only days after a Poit was nearly mauled to death by a creature only known as a honey badger, having been training on the landmass known as Africa. He had strayed too far off the path and mistaken the animal for a cat. A Jinn raised her hand, looking up at the screen as Miss Rimiki showed pictures of the 2 creatures side by side. Did he live? Just barely. The creature had severed several critical arteries in their legs, and the humans had to apply pressure wraps to keep him from bleeding out in the grasslands, Miss Rimiki replied, then folded her arms under her chest. Humans thrive in these conditions of danger, and it is why all of you must exercise extreme caution if you find yourselves on Earth. You are not built like humans, and do not have the honed minds of them. There is even rumors of humans having a sixth sense, an innate way to know when danger is near, without ever setting eyes on whatever it is that is threatening them. We believe this was instilled in them by other creatures. Mirak turned her head towards Miss Rimiki, having been staring at the slide showing an earthen-maned wolf. Other creatures? The things we believe the humans did try to exterminate, but have failed to do so. These beings are cemented in their folklore as things that even frighten humans, and are rare, hiding in the deep woods or far underground. Miss Rimiki said as she turned the slide to a horrifying creature sporting gnarled horns on its skull head and grotesque dangling limbs. These are creatures known as skinwalkers, a horrifying biological monstrosity that, while first thought to be made up, have been confirmed by leading Yorpal and Poit biologists. Traces of these beings have been found in a mountain range known as the Appalachians, and stories of them lead us to believe they were the first true apex predator that the humans had to tackle. There were others, but this is one of the few still alive on the planet, and we are still looking for others. Miss Rimiki then chuckled, rubbing at her temple. Then there is the issue of humans wanting to bring back some of their old land predators with the help of the Yorpal. Breakthroughs with bringing some of the more mundane animals back to life, such as the Irish elk and Paoli, incensed the humans. There is now news that the Tasmanian tiger now roams the world again, and the humans are setting their sights on old. "Oh no!" An Opticon gasped out, clasping his talons to his face. "They've been dreaming of this. I've seen the old recordings. Miss Rimiki held up a hand and cut the Opticon off. "Humans are banned from bringing back the giant lizards. It's already been addressed. Believe me when I say that nearly every citizen of the Confederation has seen what used to live on Earth via their historical recordings, and no one is keen to see them back on that planet, or anywhere else for that matter." The room murmured their thankfulness that the humans were being curtailed to that degree at least, but also had a curious wondering about just what else lived on that planet so long ago. "As it stands," Miss Rimiki said loudly to make them all pay attention to her again, "Earth is the most dangerous planet known to the Confederation, just behind the Deermere home planet, which, as we all know, is a shattered hunk of rock thanks to the humans. While you are allowed to go to Earth, you must do so under the careful watch of the humans. This is to ensure that no one else falls prey to the predators that roam the world freely. And yes, while it is extremely counterintuitive to keep such predators alive, it is part and parcel of human culture and their way of life to be predators that allow other predators to live. It should also be known that this is just how humans are. They are the top predator and take power from letting others live by their own choice. Grizzly bears do not stay living because they are scary to the humans. Humans allow them to live because they hold the power to delete them from existence overnight. From powerful predators, such as humans, comes the need to dominate, and this is the fourth reason why Earth is considered a death world. Humans themselves are considered a danger that must be met with keen intelligence in order to not fall prey to them. And this is thankfully still on a microscale. When interacting with humans, remember that this is a race that allows other, larger, deadly predators to exist, so they too may stay strong and keep their planet healthy. It is only their good-natured attitude and culture of friendship bonding that keeps them from becoming the next great enemy to the Confederation, but their natural reality must always be kept in the forefront of your minds. Miss Rimiki's desk dinged with a small chime, and she nodded. "That is all the time we have for today. You are all dismissed." When the classroom was empty, Miss Rimiki turned off the lights and data screens and made her way down the long hallways of the secondary space station that orbited Earth. This one was far larger, newer, and seen as a transit hub and training station, the other slightly older station mostly populated by the Opticon for their own training. Gravity was at Earth levels here, except for the transit columns that had rails of hoops to grab onto, shuffling people along in their zero gravity to the station level they sought. Due to the length of the station, elevators were seen as too cumbersome, and this method was used instead. Miss Rimiki took a loop, and it dragged her through zero gravity towards the living quarters, and she got off at her level. The gravity eased back into Earth gravity as she walked past the bulkhead, making her way towards her hab unit. She placed her hand onto the reader, and the door unlocked with a sharp click. Miss Rimiki stepped inside, grinning widely as the human inside turned around, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Well, there's my little space dragon. I got dinner ready, so come, sit down. And what all were you teaching today?" the man said, rolling his shoulder as he threw the towel into the sink. Miss Rimiki's grin widened as she closed the door behind her, stepping into the kitchen with graceful sways of her hips. "Oh, you know, just how dangerous humans are." "I have them!" Ari cried out, holding a large black painted shipping crate above her head. "Minnie-Doo, the smugglers finally got me my package." Minnie-Doo, for all his patience, lowered his eyelids in annoyance when Ari called him Minnie-Doo. He just preferred Doo nowadays, thanks to the humans making fun of the mini part of his name and his lack of height. However, when he heard Ari mention smugglers, he shut off his gardening hose and turned around, his large blue eyes wide. Smugglers? I thought I told you not to speak to those human smugglers again. They're dangerous. Minnie cried out in alarm, looking around in a panic to make sure none of the guard patrols were walking around near their hab home. Harry giggled breathily, her bright pointy teeth glinting in the glow of the large sun above their planet. Oh, come on. You want to win our first planetary cook-off, don't you? Minnie grumbled in his throat, looking at the crate his mate was presenting to him. For all her faults, Minnie loved Airy with all his two hearts, and despite the fact that she was 4 inches taller than him, she was the most fetching Rimiki he had ever met. Rimiki were two-toed, long-footed species of the stars, known for their long horizontal ears, fully colored eyes with light-colored pupils, long and elegant forefingers, lithe bodies, and their odd tails that were long, agile, and adorned at the end with a furred tuft. They were neither part of the Cinderal Confederation nor in parley with the humans, instead preferring to remain completely neutral in terms of galactic politics. That did not mean they didn't play nice when they needed to, only entering into deals and regulations with the Confederation if the moment required. Their homeworld of Zarir was much like that of the human world, except the Rimiki had long ago removed all but the required species from their world, leaving them to farm and grow their crops in peace. They were not a militant species, preferring to grow food instead, which made a lot of other species dote on them, prized for their rearing of plants. The Rimiki fed a lot of worlds and tried to keep out of the limelight as they did so. This changed when humans started using their world as an in-between for smuggling, trying to stay out of the prying eyes of the Confederation and evade the authorities. The Rimiki were still too timid to really confront the human smugglers, instead giving them a strongly worded letter that outlined their request for the humans to leave the world proper. To their surprise and delight, the human smugglers actually agreed, leaving Zarir and instead hiding out on the 4 orbiting moons in secret underground bases. The smugglers returned soon enough and held a human feast for the Rimiki as an apology, something they called a cookout, and the Rimiki were hooked by the premise. They had been drawn in by the good-natured and friendly banter of all the human cooks, their little cooking tournaments, and the fact that the humans gave a small trophy to the best-voted cook of the cookout. The Rimiki were enthralled at the thought of not only winning a nonviolent battle of wits and skill, but also getting a small trophy at the end of it all. Rimiki may not have been able to wage war, but they could very happily wage cooking splines and serving ladles. When the human smugglers came back to help plan this worldwide cookout, Airy had learned of a secret human food specialty that no one else was aware of, and sought to be the first winner of a Zarir cookout for their region. Her secret was in the little crate she held out to her husband. Minnie looked down at the crate with worried eyes, then looked up into the face of his mate. Are you sure? If it needs to be smuggled in, that usually means it has been banned, and things get banned for good reason. You worry too much, Airy said happily, leaning down to plant a fat kiss on her husband's red forehead. Imagine the upper hand this will give us. What even are they? Minnie asked as he watched Airy quickly step over to their plant progression station, the many pots and pre-measured soil clots sitting ready. Airy undid the crate with the code she had been given, and the digital locking pad gave out a cheerful beep. Seeds! If we get them growing fast enough, we will be able to use the berries. Berries? Are we making something sweet? Minnie asked, as he had seen what Airy had bought and placed into deep storage a few days before. Then why did you buy all that meat? It was expensive, you know. Plus, everyone else seems to be aiming for something sweet. There's a rumor humans have a big yakatung. Airy opened the crate, drumming the fingers of her hands along the edge as she looked from side to side in excitement. Oh, look at them! They look like little moons. Minnie looked past his wife's arm, his eyes narrowed at the little suspicious seeds. Their own plants produced dagger-like seeds that glowed brightly in different colors when exposed to starlight, and grew into vegetables or large meaty heads of grain that were ground into powders and flours. They were prized for their flavor, and the Rimiki were making solid trade with the humans, though the local farmers of Earth seemed to take offense that their wheat was getting beaten quite handily in the markets. The fulfilm plant was more refined and naturally tastier than earth wheat, which was said to taste very rustic and barbaric. Though there were planets who found the fulfilm flour way too sweet and instead bought wheat, but they were far fewer in number. Harry, darling, I don't know, Minidu said in a worried tone as he picked up one of the clear bags. He narrowed his eyes at it, trying to read the handwritten English letters. Nagor Vipin? Nagor Vipin. He picked up another little bag, and the human who wrote on it appeared to write like he had been hit by a truck as a child. Red Sakira Habanero? Habanero? Oh, shush, Aries said, giving her husband another kiss on one of his long ears. This is going to win us first place for sure. Humans love these things, and they're going to be half of the judges in our area. Minidu grumbled in his throat, even as the ear kiss made him blush. Well, we are nearer to the capital. I suppose that means more humans. That's the spirit! Aerie giggled out, then started scooping out more bags and pulling out the highly advanced damp tim soil pots. These pots were designed by the Rimiki for the Rimiki and were a closely guarded secret in terms of production. They sold tons of them in trade to only certain races that they approved of, but no one knew how it was they were made on the planet of Zirir. Aerie began setting the pots down one by one, tapping in the little arming codes that flickered at her on her digital readouts. Minidu, my little Dreyu, could you grab the really good soil? Minidu blushed again, growling lightly in his throat as he turned and looked back at Aerie. Why do you have to call me that? Because you always dance for me when I ask. Aerie replied over her shoulder with a smirk, her long braided silver hair glittering in the light. Minidu stammered, his face so red he looked purple, and he swiftly turned around, opening the door to their storage bay before his mate could see his tail fur begin to fray. Aerie snorted to herself and giggled. She loved how easily flustered he got, and was one of the reasons she took the vow of matehood with him in the first place. While Minidu unfluffed his tail within the storage bay and got a hold of himself, Aerie got to work setting up the pots and placing in the buko grubs, a little insectoid that was fantastic for helping plants grow faster. They fed off of a nutrient puck at the bottom of the damp tim pot, producing nutrient-rich soil that they deposited around the roots. And when they went through their growing stages, turned into large, fluttering insects with rather dull black wings. Despite not being pretty, they carried pollen everywhere they went, as well as the genetic makeup of the plant they were planted with. When their life cycle came to an end, they would crawl into the ground and lay eggs. The eggs would then hatch and help grow the plant that would spring forth from the body of the dead, fully grown buko insect. Aerie started humming to herself when Minidu returned with the good soil packs. And she didn't let up her steady flirting. Planting and growing was a rather romantic and sensual thing in Rimiki culture, but it was kept strictly platonic on the professional level when it came to farming. The furthest any Rimiki farmer would go was perhaps flirtatious glances toward the other growers, or having to drink a little more water than usual in order to maintain productivity. At home, however, gardens were adorned with ground couches and chairs for a reason. As Aerie watched Minidu work his fingers into the soil and aerate it, she gave him a curt swat on the buttocks with her tail. She then gave him another kiss on the ear, when his tail tuft fluffed out, and he struggled to maintain his composure. By the time they got the seeds planted and finished with their break, the sun was setting, and Minidu was gulping down water in the kitchen like he had been running for miles. Aerie just sighed out happily from the floor couch in their living room, her hair a mess and her long ears still sporting grass stains. While she lounged on the cushions, Minidu started working on dinner, even though he was a little shaky in the knees. Over the course of the following Zirir weeks, Aerie watched with eager, wide eyes as the earth plants began to grow, the big, broad green leaves soaking up the light from the bright sun. Aerie tinkered with these little plants as they were quite new to her, and she found them fascinating. Insects tended to avoid them, but the buko grubs appeared to be energized by the plants. While she usually didn't have to, she had to replace the nutrient brick 3 times, and the grubs were growing quite fat and happy. This led to the plant thriving and growing quite large, and it was on the 4th Zirir week that Aerie finally let curiosity get the better of her. Airy plucked one of the smaller plant leaves and nibbled on it, and her long ears twitched with pleasure as her eyes went wide. Mmm, she hummed, giving the leaf another couple of chews before plucking off another one. My word, these are delicious. Are the berries already growing? Minnie-Doo called out from the back door of their home, leaning out slightly as he stirred a desert mixture in a stoneware bowl. Airy picked a few more of the smaller leaves and ran over to him, her ears bouncing and tail flicking behind her. No, the leaves! Why are you always eating leaves? Minnie-Doo said in annoyance, rolling his eyes as he kept stirring his batter. Remember when you got sick after eating the leaves from those yorpal plants? Airy, however, was not taking no for an answer, going as far as to pinch the flesh of Minnie-Doo's chest so he'd cry out in anger and pain, allowing her to stuff the leaf in his mouth. He was still angry, but had to admit the leaves did have a light floral taste. The time finally came when the berries themselves began to grow, bright or dark red with a skin that caught the light in a pleasing way. Airy, of course, kept teasing Minnie-Doo that the plants obviously took after him, and kept pestering him until he blushed to the point of being purple, just so Airy could compare the berry colors to his own. By the time the berries were fully ripened, they were in a crunch for time, and Minnie-Doo had to take up the slack of the culinary arts that Airy so dearly lacked. As he put on his apron and studied the data slate he hung on a holder, he tilted his head, his ears wiggling in curiosity. Chili. Airy, what is this? Some human delicacy, Airy said from the floor cushions, trying to figure out what the humans served with this dish. They eat it a lot at cookouts and have whole tournaments about it. I bet if we kick past the hoops, we can stun them. Minnie-Doo snorted. Ari was terrible at Pendaril, a game that the Rimiki played by kicking or carrying an inflated ball along a playing field. The goal was to try and kick it through a set of 2 hoops that were at different heights and sizes. Minnie-Doo was, however, an expert at the sport, and Airy had come to watch him play once. Apparently, she didn't watch the game much, just watching him run around and tackle the other players. Well, I'll give it a go, Minnie-Doo murmured, dragging his finger along the data slate and observing the ingredients. Thankfully, there are plenty of analogs. I have no idea what an onion or butter is, but I bet it would be expensive to import. Airy's ears perked up as she heard Minnie-Doo muttering. Oh, just hoping our vegetables taste the same as theirs. Minnie-Doo sighed out to her, starting to chop up a root vegetable with his square cutting blade. I think the ones on the data slate are vetted, Airy called back, switching through the channels to hopefully find one broadcasting human television. They were researched by the Jinn, so I think they're accurate. They can't even get food past their masks, Minnie-Doo muttered, pulling out another vegetable. What would they know about taste? Airy shrugged as she lounged on the ground cushions. I don't know. They say the entire species are super tasters or something. Sure, Minnie-Doo murmured, checking the time on the data slate. This should be ready to go the morning of the tournament. Are you sure you want the meat so chunky? If they were cut smaller, it would cook faster. No! Airy said in a panic, scrambling from the cushions in a tangle of tail and limbs and running to the kitchen. We're making Texas chili. Texas? Minnie-Doo asked, looking around to Airy as he pulled out the large portions of red meat he had defrosted overnight. What in the tail's end is a Texas? A great land of food, violence, and you're really with big, long horns, Airy said with that same glow of excitement in her eyes, something that Minnie-Doo loved about her. They are experts on chili. Minnie-Doo grumbled in his throat as he looked down at the meat in his hands. It was more efficient to cut it small, and everything would taste the same anyway. Be a good little Dreyu and just follow the recipe, Airy murmured into one of his long ears, and he quickly shimmied his shoulders to get her away from him. Hey, if you want me to cook this stuff, we don't have time for any of that. Minnie-Doo fussed, smacking Airy on the chin with his tail. Airy grinned devilishly. I don't know. It has to cook for hours. Minnie-Doo felt her hand slip underneath his apron, going for the waistband of his lounging pants, and he danced away from her, wielding the meat in front of him like a blade. No, bad. Go sit in the living room. Airy pouted playfully and swished her way back to the ground cushions. Minidu sighed out in relief and running a hand through his dusky lavender hair. Then he remembered he had been holding raw meat and quickly ran over to their washing basin to rinse the blood out before it sank in too deep. While Airy did drive by pestering on him due to her boredom, Minidu found this odd recipe quite fun to do. The steps to making the dish were rather relaxing, the softening and simmering of all the vegetables together, adding dashes of powders, pastes, and spices, and hearing the subtle sizzle of them all melding together in his large cooking vessel. "Oh, right, we need the berries," Minidu said to himself, reaching over and grabbing the bowls of berries he and Airy had collected. This was going to be an extremely large batch, his vessel large enough to likely feed a small settlement, and it had been quite expensive to buy. Airy, of course, wanted the special painted one, as she thought it would wow the human judges more. Cutting up all the meat and vegetables had been a chore, regardless of how it was making the house smell, but this was one of the last steps anyway. As Minidu started chopping up the berries, his nose gave a little twinge about halfway through the bowls, and his head gave a small reflexive jerk to the side. "Oh," Minidu said in aggravation, his nose giving a short sniff. "Ugh, what?" He cleared his throat, his eyes starting to slightly water as he kept chopping through the berries. He looked up at the recipe and started scraping the seeds into a small slot in the counter, connected to their waste disposal. But as he sniffed again, a small tear went down his cheek. "What in the soil?" Minidu grunted out and swiped his palm along his cheek. The sensation made his body stand still for a moment, and he set down his blade, quickly gathering the chunks of berry and tossing them into the vessel. The sensation grew into a fire along his flesh and wiped at his face again. "Uh-oh." "Huh?" Airy called out from the living room, having been watching a documentary about a human tyrant that commanded great lizards in battle. Minidu said, then cried out and started scrambling for the washing basin again. "I'm on fire!" "You're on fire?" Airy screeched in confusion, running into the kitchen so quickly she slid across the decorative tile floor. "How are you on fire?" "My face!" Minidu cried out, splashing water on his face and rubbing it along his eyes. "My face is burning!" Airy went to lunge for Minidu, then heard the cooking elements chirp. "The chili! Add the flavoring stock!" Minidu warbled from under the stream of water, hissing at the pain in his face. "The red container!" Airy flailed around the kitchen for a moment, her tail whacking against both Minidu and the cooking vessel. But she found the container and poured in the massive amount of stock all at once, her muscles bulging under the weight and strain. "The lid!" Minidu cried out, gesturing vaguely toward the stove as he tried to open his eyes under the cool water. "Stir it and get the lid on it!" Airy managed to get the lid on flush, then flailed around the hab-home a little more until she found the first aid kit. It took a while, but eventually the burning sensation left, leaving Minidu cradled in Airy's arms with bloodshot eyes and a nose that never seemed to stop running. He was rather angry, if not righteously pissed at Airy for having grown those things in their garden, but he looked forward to destroying the plants as soon as he was able. Not even the forehead kissing and snuggling by Airy could cool Minidu's temper, and when he woke up the next morning to destroy the plants, he felt a new reason to sweat. The buko grubs had all left. This is impossible!" Minidu said in a horrified voice, moving the soil around in the pots to try and find the grub. "They're not even close to this part of their cycle." Minidu's heart froze in his chest. Zarir had been carefully cultivated so that every plant was edible to the livestock animals that roamed freely. Poison nor predator kept alive. If just the juice of these berries caused this on his cheeks... "Oh no." Minidu groaned out in horror, clasping his hands to his face. Infecting the planet with an alien species of plant was one thing, but if those plants could cause harm, the planetary government instilled both hard fines and banishment depending on the severity of the crime. Minidu looked around at his hab-home, the garden he had made with Airy, the plants around him, then down to the berry plants in their pots. He quickly gathered them up and shoved them down into the waste disposal, turning the dial so that it initiated an early cleanse and turned everything within to ash. If no one could find the plants, then no one could tie them to Airy. No one would know Airy was the one who smuggled them here, and Eri would not be banished. He remembered when a female Rimiki tried to go with her banished mate into the depths of space, and they wouldn't let her. It was not a punishment then, they had said, and the thought of being away from Ari made his chest feel like it had been frozen solid. No, 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 Minidu whispered, running around the garden maniacally and making sure all evidence of the berry plants was scrubbed away. By the time Eri awoke, a heavily sweating Minidu had cleansed the entire garden and their home, the only evidence being left in the chili itself. "This is wonderful!" a human cried out, his smuggler's uniform both garish and somehow practical at the same time. Eri was beside herself, wiggling back and forth on her feet and tail lashing around as all the humans oohed and awed at Minidu's chili. Minidu, however, kept looking around to all the Rimiki council members who were sweating in their robes, and his clothes were all sticking to him from how nervous he was. "It is delightful, but why does it hurt?" one of the female Rimiki council members said, laughing while dabbing at her pale red forehead. "That's the chilies," a male human smuggler said, and he held out his bowl for another helping. "You added something hot in this, didn't you?" Maybe?" Eri giggled out, her hands clasped together by her waist. "It's a secret." Minidu swallowed in terror, and his tail was beginning to shake. They had been exactly last in the taste testing, and due to how happy the humans were, they had been on this grand stand for quite a long time. What was also bothering him was that none of the humans were breaking a sweat, while every Rimiki that had tried the dish were either in open pain, fanning at their mouths, or drinking anything that was creamy and within reach. "My gosh, there has to be red Savina in this. It tastes so familiar," another human said, taking off his cowboy hat and setting it on the judging table. "I swear it has to be red Savina." "Red Savina?" Minidu thought in horror. "He knows what kind of pepper it is." One of the male Rimiki council members laughed, having taken a large gulp of creamy, cool drink. "Must be a spice powder or extract from your planet. After all pepper plants are banned from transport from Earth due to the nasty incident on Dolwari." "What happened on Dolwari?" one of the humans asked, scraping the dregs of her bowl with a spoon she had brought with her. The male Rimiki council member gave a short laugh. "They were allergic to the peppers. Every member of the race. Was a space-wide emergency due to all the reactions and distress calls. Everyone thought they were under attack from how bad it was, and there were some fatalities as well." Eri, awash in her near victory, was not even paying attention to anything around her as she chatted up the humans, many of whom recognized who she was and what had been sold to her. Minidu, on the other hand, felt like he was going to faint. "I don't mean to call this early, but I think we have a clear winner here," the lead human smuggler said, and he took another ladle from Eri as well. "I haven't had chili this good since Earth. It must be quite a clever and secret ingredient to make it this good." He winked at Eri, who grinned and winked back, or tried to anyway. It looked more like a painful blink, and it made all the humans laugh. Minidu was wavering where he stood as the humans gathered him up with Eri, presenting them with a golden spatula as the award for winning the first ever Zirier cookout for their region. Those below, the losers, were glaring up at Eri and Minidu with obvious jealousy, having been hoping their locally crafted confections would win the day. There had been grumblings about Eri and Minidu cheating by making something the humans would obviously like, and it was not helping Minidu's mental state. When the cookout was done, everything put away and the plans made for the next cookout the following year, Minidu was trying to relax with Eri, who was being far more huggy and kissy than usual, even as he browsed his data slate. One thing caught his attention, and he lightly pushed Ari off of him as his eyes widened. Ari murmured, having been going in to kiss his neck before he pushed her away. I don't believe it," Minidu whispered, scrolling down the screen with his finger. "Region Tuvi winner was Sindra Wan. His recipe? Bacon-wrapped jalapenos. Region Arwan. Winning recipe was green chili Colorado. Region Rui. Winning recipe was was crab gumbo. Mini-Do started quickly tapping onto his data slate, rocketing around the shared information data sources to find what these words meant on Earth. He knew they were Earth recipes. He could tell just by the names, and soon he found them with fear dawning in his soul. Airy, Mini-Do mumbled, pointing to the screen. Look, they all contain those peppers. An alert flared to life on his data slate, nearly startling Mini-Do's spirit out of his body. These were broadcasted by the region's emergency broadcasting relays, and he tapped it open. A Rimiki council member filled the screen, her face a dire mask. Human peppers have been found on a farm outside Region KO, and livestock have been found dead from swollen throats and nasal passages, having accidentally consumed extra peppers when they escaped their perimeter pens. We are currently tracking where these peppers came from, but it appears they are addictive in nature to our animals, and so far, none of them have been found to not be allergic to these red, green, and sometimes yellow berries. No animals who have consumed the peppers have survived thus far, and we are afraid some of our flying species may have carried seeds into the wild. They appear to grow extremely fast when sprouting from the later stages of the buko grub, and, as the council member kept speaking, Mini-Do darted his eyes to Airy. It was a very good thing you just bought a spice mixture, isn't it? Mini-Do said slowly, from those smugglers. Airy pursed her lips, then looked up to the golden spatula they had hanging on the wall. Best purchase I ever made. I agree, and none of it was left over. Mini-Do said quietly, turning off the data slate. All the powder was used in the chili, and the pepper packet was burned in the waste unit. Airy draped a leg over Mini-Do, and somehow felt both victorious and a little bit like a smuggler herself. Of course, after all, it is imperative that every Rimiki recycles. The Rimiki that was caught red-handed with the peppers was in fact banished, though he was taken in by the human smugglers so that he would be able to more easily see his family, his identity hidden quite well. The seeds, sadly, had spread far and wide, and were quick to grow in the luscious Zirir soil. This nearly caused a mass extinction of all roaming livestock on the Zirir planet, the berries growing in a near manic speed and becoming quite hard to eradicate. The combined forces of the Rimiki government managed to just only preserve enough of the planet's livestock in order to try and regrow their numbers, but the days of free roaming were over. With their markets plummeting, they needed to bounce back quickly, or else their population would never be able to afford meat for the next couple of years, or other animal products that had been produced on Zirir. The Rimiki, while avid eaters and growers of plants, needed meat, and it was not looking good in the game of affording meat from anywhere else around them. There was, however, a suddenly open avenue on the black market for human peppers, an extremely valuable open avenue that the Jinn and Karlaken had made possible. The Rimiki just so happened to know the right people who could not only source them the meat they needed, but also get their new cash crop into the hands of buyers. Oddly enough, the neighbors of Airy and Mini-Do noticed that despite the slow inbound trade of meat, the two Rimiki always seemed to have more meat than anyone else, and a lot of humans often stopped by for dinner on the off days. Watch there be nothing here, Wendry muttered, holding a long-ago smuggled human rifle to his chest. We must have traveled over 9 AU to get to this rotten hulk of a planet, and we haven't even seen anything. Jeremy, a human, rolled his head over to the black Yorple, pressing his lips together in annoyance. Hunting doesn't always end quickly. Sometimes you just have to hike around a planet for a bit until you find what you're looking for. Can we find what we're looking for a little faster? Grangan sighed out, holding both a rifle in her upper arms and a pistol in one of her lower arms. This is taking forever. We keep having to stop and make camp. You said it would only take a day at the most. Jeremy grumbled in his throat before speaking. Yes, and it appears I was wrong. Now, if you two keep bellyaching the entire time, we're never going to find this thing. We shouldn't even be on a job like this, Wendry said, wiggling his AK-49. We're smugglers. We're supposed to be running around with crates of these things. Grangan chuffed out a laugh. We took this job because it pays our usual rate 10 times over. If we catch this thing for, She scratched her chest, her voice humming hollowly inside her mask. Remind me again who is paying us to do this? Magamon Trictor, Jeremy replied. He's a massive collector and wants this thing for his daughter or something. What is a Felomore going to do with an animal of this size? Wendry asked, remembering the towering, lumbering peoples that look like sentient granite. They're not exactly an energetic people, and they aren't what I would call athletic either. Jeremy shrugged. Stick it in a cage with a label. This big rock just has animals on it anyway, so it's not like anyone is going to miss it. It's a nice rock, though, Grengan said, smiling under her mask. Very pretty, lots of plants, not too hot, not too cold. It's a surprise that an intelligent life form hasn't evolved here at all, as it could not be in a more perfect habitable zone. Jeremy grunted as he started up the incline of a rocky hill, batting a large leaf from a tree away from his face. Say what you will, I did not enjoy that part of the forest with those weird-looking mushrooms. Entire place felt like it was watching me the entire time. Yes, well, you'll get some weird areas too, Grengan said, starting up the hill behind Jeremy. Grengan looked at their backs, then down to her aching padded paws. I should have bought those modified boots while we were on Earth. Feels like I've been walking on glass since the 3rd day of us landing here. Stop being a little wiener and come on, Jeremy chided, smacking another leaf away from his face. This place was a forest planet through and through, just hundreds of miles of forests, ponds, lakes, and oceans that seemed to vibrate with wildlife. The humans were looking to make it a settlement, as it shared a common gravity with most of the Cinderal Confederation, and it would be a neutral planet where everyone could live in peace. Getting past the security blockage and defeating the atmosphere scanners had been the easy part as far as Jeremy and his crew were concerned. The Emerald Vagabond was a custom ship that had more hardware than a stealth bomber, but instead of packing bombs, it carried crates of contraband. Jeremy had thought the job would have been super simple. Go to the planet, snatch up whatever the hell this animal was, then leave. He pulled out the sketch again and held it up, tilting his head at it as he and his fellow smugglers hiked. The creature looked a lot like a dragon, if a dragon was mixed with a Maine Coon cat and a timber wolf. According to Magamon, it was going to be small, but everything was small to those rich walking boulders. Jeremy's communication slate chirped, so he stuffed the sketch back into his pocket, instead holding up the slate as he unclipped it from his armored chest plate. Jeremy smiled at it, making Wendry look over. Told you her sister was into you, Wendry said with a grin, looking over at Grengan. Couldn't even keep 2 of her hands off of you while Grengan was trying to argue with her mother. Grengan stiffened, turning to stare daggers at Wendry from under her mask. I can't believe you would even say that! It's customary for a djinn to hold onto a guest's arm while showing them around our domiciles. Jeremy rolled his eyes, slowing his step to lag behind the 2 bickering aliens. Doesn't explain the lipstick mark on Jeremy's cheek and the fact I saw her holding on to a lot more than his arm. Wendry teased, making sure both his ears and tail were not within reach of the djinn. If you're not careful, you're gonna have a Zumra problem on your handsy-wansies. You little... Grengan growled, stomping towards Wendry and making the Yorple skitter away, cackling as he took cover within a bush. This is abuse, you know. It's against the Unified Cinderal Confederation Code of Conduct. I'll report you. Wendry laughed out from within his safety bush, doing his best to avoid the free hand of Grengan that was coming after him. Grengan finally got an ear and started tugging the now hissing and cursing Yorple out of the bush. Oh, you will you? I'd flip on you so hard it would make your fur turn more gray. My fur isn't turning gray, Wendry spat, swatting at Grengan's strong hand. It was just how the light was hitting it. Uh-huh, sure, Grengan chided, letting go of Wendry's ear and letting the fussing Yorple recover. Jeremy, why don't you stop her? You know how sensitive my ears are? Wendry said, his voice trailing off as he looked around behind him. He looked left and right, giving the air a light sniff as Jeremy was nowhere to be found. Grengan? Grengan turned around, brushing leaves from her own armored chestplate, but then her eyes narrowed from under her mask. Where's Jeremy? As if on cue, a loud, panicked scream finally made it to their ears, causing Grengan to startle backwards and Wendry to fluff up with adrenaline. Something grabbed him? Grengan cried out, quickly rustling around with her free hand in a pocket searching for her tracker. You have the sensitive ears and nose. Why didn't you hear or smell anything? Wendry sputtered, his tail and fur fully fluffed out. Smell something? There's nothing here, just us and Jeremy. Obviously not, Grengan growled, turning on her tracker and looking down at the screen as it beeped. Gangjil too! He's moving fast! Come on! Wendry moaned in his throat as he clicked the safety lever down on his AK-49, pulling the buttstock into his shoulder. Oh man, we're so getting eaten. Shut up! Grengan hissed, then took off at a run in the direction of Jeremy's tracker. Wendry was right behind her, hoping that whatever took Jeremy would see her first instead of him. Jeremy's tracker blip was moving at incredible speeds and outpaced them several times, only catching up to the blip if Grengan and Wendry sprinted full out. By the time they caught the blip for the fourth time, they were both wheezing and drenched in sweat. Grengan's hand shook as she held up the tracker screen, sweating pouring down her neck and shoulders in streams, while Wendry wheezed and cursed breathily, holding his hand to a stitch in his side. It took a few minutes for Grengan and Wendry to get their breath back, the two pacing in place or resting their hands on their knees, dragging in the cool, fresh air around them. When they had finally regained the ability to talk, Wendry pointed down at the tracker screen. How far away is he now? Is it still moving? No, Grengan said, standing up straight. No, it's sitting still, just over those sets of hills there. Wendry looked at the tree-covered hills and made an open-mouthed growl, baring his fangs. More hills and trees. Why is this entire planet just hills and trees? Come on, Grengan said, holding her pistol up and her rifle at the low ready. Wendry set his own rifle back into his shoulder, muttering the entire time they walked. It took a while to make their way through the thickly treed hills, but they finally came up over the last crest, finding themselves in a kind of rock and timber nest. Grengan and Wendry held their rifles up, breathing slowly in and out of their noses as they swept their barrels from side to side, keeping an eye out for any sign of Jeremy. A tail lashed out from the lush grass and swept Grengan's legs, the Djinn letting out a short bark of pain before she fell bodily to the ground, the air being knocked out from her lungs. She wheezed tinnily from inside her mask, and she looked around, seeing Wendry had skittered up a tree like a startled cat. Where? Grengan coughed out, looking around and brushing a leaf away from her mask with a shaking hand. Wendry leaned down from the tree trunk he was clinging to, hissing down at her. That was a tail! A big fuck-off huge tail! Tail? Grengan moaned, leaning up slowly and trying to get her lungs fully inflated again. As she blinked painfully from under her mask, she leaned all the way forward with a grunt, raising her head to look around her. She found herself staring into the wide eyes of Jeremy, just 20 feet away. The human hugged to the chest of a gigantic creature that looked like the thing in the sketch. It was massive and did indeed look like a dragon of Earth, maybe one of the Japanese or Chinese ones. That similarity stopped behind body shape, as the thing had the head of an Earth timber wolf and the fur of an extremely fuzzy feline. The fur ran all along the top of the body, while the bottom part was scaled with thick plates of armor. Jeremy! Grengan hissed out, drawing the rifle back up to her shoulder. You alive? Jeremy nodded up and down rapidly, his arms held to his chest to keep the creature's long claws from getting to his face. He's alive? Wendry whispered in shock as he thumped down to the ground gracefully, following the motion all the way to the ground so he laid flat. How is he alive? It should have eaten him by now. It's high, Jeremy hissed out, closing his eyes tightly as the creature gave a low rumble, shifted, and placed its nose against Jeremy's head, breathing in deeply. Grengan had to slam herself backwards against the ground to avoid the curling tail whipping around, and she sat back up quickly. You drugged it? No, it's just high, Jeremy said quietly, trying to wiggle free and only getting pulled close towards the creature's nose. It was going to eat me, but then started sniffing me. He kept sniffing and fell asleep. The creature happily growled deep in its throat as it rolled over onto its back, wiggling back and forth on the ground while huffing at Jeremy eagerly, its tail still lashing back and forth like a tree trunk-sized whip. Wendry caught the tail full in his chest and went screeching across the ground towards Jeremy, thumping into the creature's soft chest fur with a woof of air leaving his lungs. Jeremy quickly grabbed the Yorple and pulled him to safety so he wouldn't get crushed. Damn it! Grengan spat, quickly coming up onto her feet, but then having to high step as the tail started to curl. "Oh no! No! Grengan shouted in horror, trying to outrun the tail as best as she could and make it out of the gap. No! Not like this! She tripped on a root, and as she stumbled, she was swept in by the tail as the creature curled in on itself, still huffing Jeremy and Windry like they were scent sticks. Grengan whimpered as she was brought face to face with Jeremy, the other massive clawed paw of the creature coming around to cradle both herself, Jeremy, and the wheezing Wendry. "Can I be myself?" Wendry wheezed out painfully as a massive sword-sized nail came to rest around his neck. "Don't you dare piss on me," Jeremy growled to Wendry, moving the claw away from the Yorble's neck and keeping the creature's nose away from him in case it caused it to do something else. "We need to," Jeremy started, then closed his eyes as the giant creature huffed him again, dragging his hair into its nose, and then giving both Wendry and Jeremy a lick. "To get the ship over here now." "You want Eri to fly our ship?" Grengan said in a quiet outrage, also catching an errant lick from the massive wolf dragon. "She'll crash it into us before she ever landed it properly." Jeremy shook the spit away from his face as the creature licked him a few more times, spitting out as a large glob of slobber coursed down his face. "Just tell the point to bring the ship here." Grengan wiggled back and forth until 2 of her 4 hands were free, then tapped a quick message to the likely sleeping point. The message was not answered for nearly 20 minutes, and Eri's only reply was a kissy face emoji. The emojis were becoming extremely popular now that the humans had unleashed their sarcastic expertise across the stars, and Grengan hated them. Eri, on the other hand, had several collections of them, and let Grengan know she was close by sending her an emoji of a cat playing with a ruler. The ship landing was rough, by all standards, but the beast didn't even try to move. Instead, opening its giant eyes and watching the craft with red-eyed curiosity, Eri came prancing down the ramp of the ship, wearing her now iconic cat ear headphones from Earth on her pointed ears and a bright pink pair of Earth-made Crocs. "So you found it!" Eri shouted with a laugh, slapping her knees. "What is it doing? Shouldn't it be tearing you guys apart or something?" Jeremy and Wendry glowered at Eri upside down as the large beast had been rolling back and forth and was currently settled onto its back at an angle. "Do you think you can drag us in?" Grengan bellowed out muffledly from beside the beast's neck, her entire body barely visible through the thick fur. "Is it gassed?" Eri asked, jumping down onto the grass and skipping towards the giant purring animal. "I mean, we can likely drag it in if it's gassed, but that would be a lot of cable and parts to move around. Why is it like this?" "I think it has something to do with Jeremy," Wendry growled, then let out a quiet "ugh" as the creature's long tongue caught him across the face. Eri hummed to herself, ran back inside the ship, then came back out with a long pry bar. "I think the main issue is you guys being in his grasp. Let's try and get you free." Slowly and methodically, Eri began applying pressure between the beast's toes. There were a few close calls with the tail, as well as Eri almost getting grabbed up with Grengan, but she managed to wiggle both the Jinn and Yorble free from their hairy bonds. As Grengan and Wendry rubbed at their joints and rolled their necks, Eri stood in front of them, tilting her head at Jeremy as she leaned against her pry bar. "Well," Jeremy shouted down at her as the creature began to slap at his face and sniff at his hair over and over. "Get me out of here!" Eri turned to Wendry. "If we get the human loose from that thing, is it going to attack us, you think?" "It's possible," Wendry replied, rubbing the old spittle from his fur. "But at this point, I think something on Jeremy is getting it high enough to not be outwardly hostile." "Get me away from this thing!" Jeremy yelled angrily, jerking himself back and forth from within the massive paws of the dragon-like beast. "It's been doing nothing but sniffing and licking me since it snatched me up!" "That may be the key, actually," Grengan murmured, finally getting her curved mask back on correctly. "What if we use Jeremy as bait?" "Bait?" Jeremy shouted, but was quickly smothering by the large timber wolf head of the beast. Eri nodded, wiggling her pry bar back and forth. "We could pop him out and he'll run for the ship as soon as his boots hit the ground. Actually, that's not half bad. Grengan, could you and Wendry go inside the ship and get the cage all ready?" The pair of them gave the point an odd look, but nodded, making their way back up the ship. Ari waited patiently for the creature to get a good nuzzle and sniff off of Jeremy, then started working on the many digits that held the human in place. You know, boss? Ari began shoving her bar into place. You did always say you wanted to see the wilds of the universe and meet mythic. Not when they do this, Jeremy spat, his hair resembling a giant cowlick. Now get his thumb off me and get me out! Her, Ari said calmly, finally managing to get her pry bar between a few digits that would elicit a little shock of pain. This beastie has no dangly bits. Ari! Jeremy growled, kicking his feet around to get more room. Ari pushed up on the bar, and the creature's eyes shot open, the intense shock of nerve pain causing it to open all of its paws at once. Jeremy fish-flopped up into the air and hit the grass on all fours, then took off into a sprint towards the ship. Well, that was lucky, Ari said with a smile, ducking down as the creature righted itself with a quick twist of its body. I guess fingies are all the same no matter what creature it is. Jeremy was sprinting as hard as he could, looking over his shoulder to see the long dragon-esque body of the creature twist and loom into the open. He blanched, fear kicking his legs into overdrive as he screamed at the ship, Grangan! Grangan, get the cage ready! There was no response except for the engines to the ship turning back on, spooling up with power. He then heard Ari puffing along at an angle away from him, running towards the cockpit ramp, and he had another sudden jolt of fear as he yelled over at her. You better not leave me here! Jeremy screamed at her, jabbing a finger at her as the creature tumbled head over heels behind him, too high to run properly. If you leave me here, I will find you! Just run at the cage! Ari shouted back at him, and Jeremy was finally close enough to see Wendry working the winch system, drawing up the magnetic guillotine door of the cage. The beast found its footing and surged forward, clearing the distance between Jeremy quickly, despite it appearing to forget how its four legs worked. With the shuddering rattle of the deck plating, Jeremy made it just past the magnetic door as the beast slammed into him, carrying both Jeremy and the creature itself into the large solid-walled cage. I got it! Wendry bellowed, slamming the release button and letting the door slam shut. Grangan, open the hole! Grangan threw her cutting torch away and wrenched open the partially cut door, bending over to see Jeremy getting another good round of huffing. Take my hands! Jeremy reached out and grabbed both of the offered hands with his own, and he was slowly jerked out of the hole inch by inch. In the end, it took both Grangan, 4 of her arms, Wendry, and Ari to finally extract Jeremy from the cage, and he looked a little worse for wear, due to the beast getting desperate and using its claws towards the end. As Ari fixed up the rake marks on Jeremy's legs, Wendry wasted no time in taking off, getting them off of the planet before anything else showed up to get a whiff of Jeremy. It took roughly 42 hours for the creature to sober up, and that's when the wailing started. Jeremy, friend, boss, human, you gotta go get that thing high again. Wendry moaned out one morning, his fully colored eyes strained and dark around the edges. It's been 12 hours of the howling and keening. Just go let it sniff you. Jeremy, stubborn but as tired as the rest of them, was making coffee for Ari and the Djinn, as Yorples got odd when they drank coffee. I'm not doing it. I will do a lot of things for money, but I am not letting myself be used as catnip for the wolf dragon down there. Grangan grumbled into the kitchen area with Ari, both of them looking as dog-tired as Wendry felt. Boss, Ari sighed out, pulling lightly on her long ears to try and alleviate some of the headache she had. Just let it get one good whiff, enough to net us a solid nap. Grangan nodded. I agree, Jeremy. Just sit next to the hole and let it sniff you. It'll pull me through, Jeremy whined, pointing down at his leg. It damn near took my legs off. What if I cut a small hole? Grangan asked, wobbling back and forth on her feet after being awake for nearly 24 standard hours. Just a little bitty hole. Just a itty-bitty one. Ari held up her hand, her pointer and thumb finger pinching near each other. Itty-bitty hole, boss. Just itty-bitty. It took some more asking and a few threats of mutiny to get Jeremy to agree. But Grangan was finally given permission to cut a few slits into the side of the cage. The creature growled and struck at the wall of the cage when it saw Grangan, the entire contraption rattling back and forth as she cut. Grangan was sweating bullets as the creature bared its massive fangs, snarling and biting at the air that was singing with sparks. But when it saw Jeremy loom into view, its demeanor changed. Instead of its hair being flayed out and teeth bared, it became excited. Its tail lashed from side to side. It began to trill and purr, and it then rolled onto its back, nose pressed against the slits and puffing in small shots of air. Jeremy, with tired eyes and a brain lacking proper sleep, slumped against the slits, and the creature started taking deep, purring lungfuls of his hair. Jeremy fell asleep against the cage, the creature curling up beside the wall as well, and the rest of the ship finally got some peaceful rest. This pattern continued for several more days. Jeremy would wake up, take his breakfast, and go eat beside the cage. The creature would inhale Jeremy a few times, then watch Jeremy eating, tilting his massive head and giant ears back and forth as Jeremy just talked to it, filling the space that his data slate would not. It was a long way to the Fellamore home planet, and with no jump maps available around here, they would be traveling in normal space for another 7 days before they hit one of the L-speed lanes. To pass that time, Ari wanted to do some experiments to see how smart the creature was, and nearly caused a panic when she hit the lift button and opened the magnetic guillotine door on the cage. "Are you out of your mind?" Grangan wailed from up on the service catwalk, looking down into the cargo bay with horror. "Why would you set it loose?" Ari looked up as the creature prowled out of the cage past her, looking around for Jeremy. "I mean, it didn't eat me right away. That's a good sign, right?" "It's out!" Grangan screamed, gesturing around with her 4 arms wildly. "How are you going to get it back inside its cage?" "What's all the yelling about, holy?" Wendery screamed, stepping through the main doorway above the ladder down into the cargo bay, only to scramble back through it. "Jeremy, it's loose!" Jeremy came sprinting down the corridor and bursted into the cargo bay, whipping his warm cap from his head and fluffing out his hair. "Where is it? Grangan, I'm going to jump inside. You grab—" Jeremy's voice trailed off as he looked down into the cargo bay, watching as Ari lightly tapped her palms on the creature's nose like it was a bongo drum. "Ari?" Jeremy said, and both she and the creature looked up at the human. The creature's eyes widened, and it surged up onto its legs, its tail lashing back and forth with pleasure at seeing the human. Ari chuckled to herself as the massive creature leaned up onto the corridor crossing, giving Jeremy a few light sniffs before leaning over and bowling Wendry over with its nose. "Hey, boss," Ari said, tapping her nose in thought as the creature jumped up onto its cage, leaning up and pawing absent-mindedly at the screeching form of Grangan. "I have an idea." Jeremy was clicking his tongue at the Timberwolf dragon thing, clapping his hands to try and get it to stop swatting at Grangan. "What?" "What if we didn't take this thing to the Fellamores?" Ari said, watching Grangan climbing the support rails to the catwalk in order to get further away from the creature. "What if we, Jeremy stopped, then slowly looked towards Ari. "We are not taking it to El Cardis." "Why not?" Ari said, placing her hands on her small hips. "He pays top dollar for anything he can ride, plus he's human. It may treat him the same." Wendry, still laying on the deck, blinked up at Jeremy. "He'll pay more than the Fellamores, and it will at least get played with. I bet he'll let the young ones ride it for a small fee." "Since when do you care?" Jeremy said down at the Yorple. Wendry shrugged. "Because meeting up with his circus is only half the distance to the Fellamores. Faster it's off this boat, the happier I'll be." "I vote circus!" Grangan shouted from the ceiling, then hissed at the creature from within her mask. "Get this damned thing out of here!" To Grangan's delight, the flight to rendezvous with El Cardis was short, though it took a lot of baiting and playing with the creature to get it out of the cargo hold. El Cardis was impressed by the size of the creature, as well as its agility, and his massive circus could provide the room needed for it to live comfortably. Thankfully, one of the human animal trainers took to the creature nearly on contact, and the odd sniffing behavior was observed. It appeared that whether the human was male or female, the creature seemed to derive a lot of pleasure from sniffing and licking their hair. Catnip, the timber dragon, was an instant success at the Starbound Circus, though her origins began to draw rather baleful eyes from the Confederation. Miss Rimiki set down her paper copy of Humanity's Bloodlust onto her desk, the question from one of her students having caught her off guard. "I'm sorry, can you ask that again?" "Is there a reason why humans are so murdery?" the djinn asked, her mask embellished with engravings of flowers and her forearms resting on her desk. "You've been going on and on about their wars, the famous murders, the coups, and the decimation of the Daramir. But is there a reason why they're all like this?" Miss Rimiki took in a deep breath as she looked around the room. She could see that they all seemed to have the same question in their eyes, and she was hoping they would have just taken the short history lesson for what it was. "It is a difficult question to answer, more so for the simplicity of it," Miss Rimiki said, then took one of the new manufacture memory cache cards and plugged it into the data display on the wall. "Humanity may not be the most violent of the star's children, as I believe that award goes to the Daramir, but they are by far the most violent within the Confederation." The display glowed to life, showing a pair of male human toddlers play fighting with sticks. While the Kerlaken and Yorpal may be predatory evolutions, and the Jinn, Optican, and Poit prey evolutions, none of them appear to have the predatory drive of the humans. For the current predatory evolutions of society, it was merely a means to an end, and there are very little histories of Kerlaken or Yorpal taking a distinct pleasure in doing what they had to do in order to survive. The Nimiki, despite being a predator evolution, became extremely weepy when taking life, even under the most dire circumstances. "They're the odd-looking plant lovers, aren't they?" a Kerlaken asked, her long neck adorned with human-made jewelry she had picked up from one of the traders. A Poit chuckled to himself. "They recently got into a bit of trouble with planting human peppers. Now they're black market oligarchs dealing in seeds. And they are still dealing with the loss of their livestock due to a simple mistake. You should see all the grazing statues they made of their animals in mourning," Miss Rimiki said with a nod, stepping out from behind her desk and smoothing down the sweater she was wearing. A gift from, well, that's not important. "Now, what I am going to tell you is one of the reasons why a lot of members of the Cinderal Confederation are still wary of humanity. Some even fearing humans despite having them on our side. Actually, Ramira, shut the door to the classroom and pull down the shutter." The Yorpal raised her butter-yellow eyebrows but stood, closing the door and pulling down the slatted window blocker. "Humanity," Miss Rimiki began as Ramira sat back down, scooting her fluffy tail out of the way, "is still considered an Aubrem third race. They are helpful, charming, cheerful, and may be some of the most loyal friends you will ever make. But there is a lot of darkness underneath that veneer." Miss Rimiki pointed to the children play-fighting on the screen. "Humans are ingrained biological warriors. Male children are known to wield wooden sticks as young as 3 years old, and even the younger ages are known to bite, kick, play punch, or attempt to grapple with their parents." "They try to wield fake weapons as young as 3? A male djinn said with a tilt of his masked head, his voice more curious than admonishing. "Why do they do such a thing? Are children not supposed to be cared for tenderly, wrapped in soft clothing and left to the colors of life?" A Kerlaken shrugged. "We Kerlaken are also known to bite at a young age, but it is more of a love bite, if anything." Despite their lack of teeth, even baby humans can impart an impressive amount of pressure for their size, Miss Rimiki said, turning the slide to show a line of male and female children forming a giggling, skirmishing line, wielding trash can lids, sticks, and wearing cardboard box helmets. This picture was taken by a Poit visitor who was touring about a few human cities. He watched these human children make fake war, practicing working in formations. Then, when traveling across a heavily wooded area, he came upon formations of human children wielding sticks like rifles and practicing tactical movement in the woods. "Why are children being taught these things? Children are meant to grow up free of combat, to fully develop in peace," a female Yorpal asked from near the front, her black fur catching the light oddly. "They aren't," Miss Rimiki said with a quirked brow. "They learn these things simply by watching, and innately try to mimic them. Human children are drawn to such things naturally, and not even humans know why. They dub it rough and tumble play, and the majority believes it is extremely beneficial to human children as a whole. Now, before you go asking too many questions, yes, there are many human cultures that encourage their children to play fight, pulling them apart just before it goes too far. Human parents believe it builds a foundation of knowing when too far is too far, as well as courtesies and customs. Miss Rimiki tapped the pad of her finger to her hand, and the display pulled up the next image. The real question that a lot of us have been asking is why. Earth is considered a death world, and there has been a renewed debate on whether that is for the planet or what lives on it. Thousands of years of wars have honed humans into the perfect predator. One that can break, tear, and kill when it feels a need to. Worst of all are its side effects. Side effects? Ajin asked, all of her arms crossed. Is not being able to kill easily a side effect on its own? Miss Rimiki pulled up an image by quickly tapping along her palm, and a picture of Ted Bundy filled the display. Assassins and the like are nothing new. They kill for pay, and it is a profession. There have been very few serial killers amongst the races of the Confederation, usually marked as mentally broken people that are quickly eradicated. Tintle, another black-furred Yorple, perked up her ears. Yes, Miss Rimiki? How many murderers has Yorple kind had over the last, say, 500 years? Tintle closed her eyes, trying to think, then cocked her head as she opened her eyes. 3, 4. I think 4 is right. Cendric, how many have the Kerlikan had in the same time frame? Miss Rimiki asked. 17. Cendric asked, tapping his clawed hand on his tabletop. Rendry? Miss Rimiki called out. The point folded her hands. I believe we have had 10, the last one cropping up over 30 years ago after the Federal Station Massacre. Miss Rimiki continued this pattern of asking, each pointing out the drastically low number of serial killers that each race had among the ranks of their people. When she was finished, Miss Rimiki folded her arms under her chest. This is because we are not innately a murderous group of races. Yes, we all have our issues from time to time, but for the most part, we cannot be called bloodthirsty or murderous. Humans in the last 500 years have had over 10,000 serial killers just in the unified American states alone. And that is not even counting the European coalition, Miss Rimiki said, taking an odd pleasure in the horrified faces of her students as she dropped the bombshell. Now, you may be asking yourself why they would kill like this. And yes, there are a lot of cases referring to mental breaks or other such problems of the self, as even our brains can short-circuit from time to time. You may also find it quite odd that during the war with the Daramir, these issues decreased amongst humans. Ajin held up one of her forearms. It decreased? It decreased, Miss Rimiki said darkly, tapping her fingers along her palm to bring up a few images of the humans engaging in hand-to-hand combat with the insectoid Daramir, as well as gun battles. When the humans had an enemy to fight and were fighting for a cause they saw as good or righteous, their serial killers dropped nearly 70%, as well as a slew of mental and stress issues. If anything, a lot of the Interconfederation scholars believe the overall mood of humans rose significantly. A male point leaned back in his chair, looking up at the display.